We're live. Hey, everybody. We're bringing you the best, the brightest, and also Michael Knowles. Live streaming here on both Facebook and YouTube. This is our first gathering since State of the Union.
It is.
Yeah. And that was a party, so they didn't let us do it again for about 3 or 4 months. Now we're happy to be sitting down again with you tonight. I'm Jeremy Boring, God King of the Daily Wire. That's lowercase g, lowercase k, in case any actual gods or kings are...
Could register a complaint.
Like if there's treason and blasphemy all at once, I feel like the penalty's probably
That's going to be the title of this show, I think, is Treason and Blasphemy.
Treason and Blasphemy. God King of the Daily Wire, joined by Ben Shapiro, Andrew Klavan, Michael Knowles. We have special guests tonight. Our friend Alfonso Rachel is going to join us, and international film and television star. Also, I don't know if you guys have heard this, Peabody Award-winning.
No.
Wow. How do we get
incredible? The hard way. Nick Searcy will be joining us later this evening. And we're here because Father's Day is coming up this weekend. And while only 50% of us are fathers, 100% of us have fathers, and mostly we brought the cigars. So we're going to be talking about what it's like to be a father, what it's like to appreciate fathers, what it's like to be a man. I think it'll expand beyond fatherhood, obviously, and into general male-female issues because, you know, we're in the middle of this Me Too movement. And as they tell us, the future is female, and it seems like that's a lot to unpack and maybe a pretty good time. So.
Well, here's the part where you guys be quiet and the two fathers talk.
It's never going to be
I have to tell you, I have known children, but it's a very big country. A lot of space.
Maybe he gets in.
There are a lot of girls at Yale.
I don't know. I'm not telling tales out of school here.
Well, I mean, a man who wears that. I mean, how could they refuse?
How can they resist
My
you?
goodness.
I know. It's right.
Studley.
How did he get in the building with that?
He does, for anyone watching, he does not wear this to work. Yeah. He actually changes once he's here.
He barely wears anything to work. It's just awful. It's an awful place to work. So, okay, so what are you going to talk about?
Well, let's talk about fathers. You are one.
Indeed.
What's that?
Congratulations to me.
What's that like?
Thanks for bringing it to me.
Before we get into fathers, we do have one, not only non-father, but not even prospective father, also part of the show tonight, and that's our friend Elisha Krause.
Don't use gender labels.
Oh, yeah. She's a prospective. How dare I? How dare I? Hi, Elisha.
Oh, hi. You guys are like in this really nice Upper East Side looking cigar lounge. I'm just doing my version of Mom's Night Out, which is Red Bull vodka and a vape. So have fun. I'll be here just like I was at State of the Union, taking subscriber questions for all of y'all. And I like the idea of broadening this to like manhood, because God, this world needs more men. For sure.
Yeah. And instead, they'll have to make do with us.
Yeah, we'll try.
All right. Fathers. It's a very serious topic.
Very serious.
Very serious topic. My own father, who would be ashamed if you were watching this tonight. Fortunately, he's working for a living and not tuning into the shows. But I think that one of the things that actually has always been interesting to me about this particular group is that we have pretty diverse backgrounds. You know, Drew, you write a lot about your father in your book, The Good, Great.
The great good thing.
Positive thing. The positive and affirming thing.
It's hard enough for people to
Werewolf
find.
good.
Yeah.
Werewolf good. Yeah. And of course, Ben, we know your father very well and have done a lot of work with him over the years. Michael, your father, who we just got to meet this weekend at the, I don't know, how do you talk about Michael's wedding without using the word dirt?
Why? Why? I mean, why didn't he abandon you?
I know, there should have been a father-shaped hole in the wall.
That's exactly right.
That's true. No, yeah, you met him this weekend at when I took my biggest step I've ever taken to becoming a man. That's the only contribution, really. That's true.
And then my father, who I think all of you have met, who's a great guy out in West Texas. And so we have these diverse backgrounds and I'm sure diverse perspectives on these issues, and yet we've all kind of come to a very similar place. One of the things, might surprise the audience, that we talk a lot about these issues when we're not talking about politics, and we really, because we talk about politics professionally, our hobby is not also talking about politics. So this is some of, I think, fertile ground for what our conversations are actually like, and that's why we're calling the show. I don't know if you guys got the memo. We named the show. So previously the show was just called like State of the Union coverage at a round table involving 4 guys and cigars. It really wasn't much of a title, and now we've named it The Daily Wire Backstage.
Wow. It's pretty good. Any
daily
excuse
life.
to smoke and drink in your office, you can call it whatever you want.
This is the greatest job ever. We're actually being paid to smoke and drink and sit around talking.
And the people paying us are actually probably hoping for a shout out now. Dollar Shave Club.
Dollar Shave Club.
Oh, Dollar Shave Club. So, if you don't want to look like Knowles, if you actually want to make something of your life, if you want to, have the best products available, if you want to have all of the best stuff. I mean, we are talking here the shampoo, the conditioner, the body wash, the toothpaste, the hair gel, and even that wipe that leaves your ass feeling tingly clean. Then you absolutely need to shop with Dollar Shave Club. Drew,
yes.
You don't look like Knowles. Good on you. And that means that you have used Dollar Shave Club products, my friend. So tell me about the glories of Dollar Shave Club.
I was a member of Dollar Shave Club before the Daily Wire even existed. I love it to death. I do. Because, I start shaving on Thursday to come in on Monday. And just, it's a lot of real estate to shave. And they have great blades. They come in the mail every month. They come with all those. You can put those things in the box and just order them right up. You get the full kit. And I use the whole deal. I take their premium blades. I started out cheap with the double blade. I got to the premium blade. The premium blade is great because it's got so many blades in it. You start dragging it over your hair about 5 o'clock, and by 5:30 you've kind of made it to the front. And it works. I mean, it's like,
So my wife is a big fan of the calming body cleanser, because as you can tell, I am just a calm guy. Just from the get-go.
And you radiate calm to others.
That's exactly right. The other day my wife said, "You smell great. What is it that you're using?" And I said, "Well, it's that magical calming body cleanser, because it definitely was not my natural."
And that's funny. My wife ordered up the ass wipes, and she's just been like cleansing me.
Trying to get rid of you? Yeah.
Trying to move me out of existence.
In any case, here's the best way that you can try Dollar Shave Club products for just $5.
Moving right along.
That's right. You get their Daily Essentials starter set. It comes with body cleanser, one wipe Charlie's. Those are the incredible ass wipes that get rid of Jeremy. And their world famous shave butter, their best razor, the 6-blade executive. Keep the blades coming for a few bucks more every month, and you add in the shampoo, toothpaste, or anything else that you need for the bathroom. And you can check it all out at dollarshaveclub.com/Ben. That's dollarshaveclub.com/Ben. You get that special deal with the Daily Essentials starter set. It's all awesome stuff. dollarshaveclub.com/Ben. Go check it out.
Great thing to get your dad for Father's Day.
Indeed.
See how I tied that in?
That was good.
That was really good.
In business, we call that
very
a seg.
smooth. So what did everybody's dad do? So my dad was actually like a stay-at-home dad, basically. So he was a musician who wrote for some film and TV, but he stayed home a lot more than my mom. My mom was the one who actually was working outside the house a lot more, which means that I'm extraordinarily tight with my dad. I know your dad was a radio host.
He was a big shot radio host in New York, kind of before there were national radio hosts like Rush, people who would actually, there was some syndication, but mostly you were a local guy. But New York was the biggest market, and he was the biggest guy with the old John Gambling. The two of them traded off the #1 spot for 25 years. And he went to, I got to say, the one thing that was really cool about my old man is he went to work at 3 o'clock in the morning every day, and he treated it like a job. We hardly knew he was in show business. I mean, one of the reasons I became a writer is because I thought the arts was just something you could do. I thought it was like a job, you doctor, lawyer, writer. If I had known how hard he was working, I probably would have been a little nicer to him. Not much. So.
It's kind of hard to, just briefly on your dad, it's hard for us to probably relate now that because of things like syndication, and because everything's sort of national, even cable makes television national, but the idea of a local radio host is such an intimate celebrity, and as you say in New York, in the biggest town. I mean, your dad wasn't just in showbiz; he was a giant star.
We called him the mayor of 46th Street because you would literally walk down certain streets in Manhattan and people would lean out of buildings to wave to him. Everybody knew who he was. I mean, for many, many years, when I would use a credit card or somebody, the first thing somebody would say is, "Oh, you must be, Klavan and Finch." He worked with a partner. And so he really was a local celebrity. Nobody knew him outside of New York, but the first job I ever got was in radio. Not the first job I ever got, but the first adult job I got was in radio. I went in and did the worst audition of my life, looked up and saw a promotional card for my father and blurted out, "That's my dad." And they hired me like that.
So Knowles, when your dad wasn't beating you like a redheaded stepchild.
Because you so well deserved.
That's why I dye my hair. That's why I can't use the razors.
What does your dad do?
So my dad, unlike us, we sit around, spread fake news for a living, My dad works with the mentally retarded, so he did kind of like social work, And it was interesting because my parents divorced when I was very little, before I really was conscious or anything. But I didn't realize that divorce is terrible because I saw my dad every day. He was right nearby, he'd pick me up from school, so I'd see him every single day. And it was a unique experience because only later did I realize, looking at statistics, looking what divorce really usually means for people, I didn't realize, I didn't have that experience. You know, I got to see him every day. He'd go to work very early. He'd be out basically in time to pick me up from school. And yeah, but it's a totally different, you know, it's such a totally different career field. Your father was a writer, your father was a broadcaster, you know. You fell into that broad genre. And I'm, you know, my father working with this poor community and doing all this good work, and I did exactly the opposite.
Making life worse for so many people.
Yeah. Reaching off society, doing it what it is you do, and then I pay you for it. It's just
it makes no sense.
Yeah, you bear some responsibility here.
I do. I weep about it virtually every day. And your dad, what does he do?
So my dad's an engineer for the railroad, and you know that's the guy who drives the train. So he's a locomotive engineer, and he. You know,
your dad's the coolest. That's the best.
That's a cool job.
That's the winner.
But it's a tough job. You know, people may not know railroaders are on 24-hour call. So you know, my childhood was sort of this weird, not knowing when you would see your dad, even though he and my mom happily married to this day.
Yep.
He would, you know, sometimes he'd get called at 2 a.m. and be gone for maybe 3 days and sleep in a hotel. And then he'd get back at 6 p.m. He may not go to work again for 24 hours, or he may go to work again 12 hours later. And so there was. You know, especially early on when he had less seniority in the career and could maybe pick his runs a little less, you know, he would be kind of gone from certain important events. As he's, you know, as his career sort of took shape, he had a lot more flexibility. I think my little sister and my little brother probably got a lot more of him in some ways than I did. But it's not exactly a complaint. What I actually feel like is, you know, my mom and dad got pregnant very young. And my dad basically had to make a decision to keep being a kid or to be a father. And he took the best job that he could find as a guy in a small town, you know, without a college education. He hired on to this difficult job that isn't hard in the way of manual labor. I mean, it's not like he's, you know, moving bricks digging ditches.
Right.
But that has this other kind of isolating difficulty of always being tired, working nights and days and being away from your family. And I feel like from the guy that I know is the product in many ways of those hard and isolating years where he kind of found himself out on the road. And so I've always been very appreciative of it.
So so since Father's Day is coming up, what's the best one lesson that your dad's taught you? Like you have to boil it down to one lesson that your dad taught you. What's the lesson that your dad taught you?
My dad and I didn't get along that well. We had very different points of view. And there's one piece of advice he gave me, which I simply can't say on the air. It's so filthy. It really is. But
I say it to you every day.
But I can translate it. I can translate it into speakable English, which was when I became a young man in the 60s, when suddenly sex was available. So we went from literally 1 year, I would have said, oh, you never have sex until you get married, to 2 years later, everybody was available. And my father said, how can I put this? He basically, well, I think I translated this. He said, basically, just remember, every vagina comes with a human being attached. And that is actually the best advice anybody's ever given me about anything, because it turns out to be exactly true.
Yeah.
That's pretty good.
Pretty amazing.
You know, I think the best advice I got, I couldn't sum it up into a line, but I do kind of get it from my father's dispositional conservatism. And that's a different thing than like, you know, I don't know, voting for Trump or low taxes or whatever. That dispositional conservatism of, you know, when I had tough times or my family had tough times, he would just do what he had to do.
Yeah.
And it wasn't pleasant, and it was costly and difficult, and he would just do it and wouldn't talk about it and wasn't a bit, and just kind of do it, you know. And when there would be social questions, obviously we live in this kind of crazy social moment where, you know, I think I now legally have to use the girls' room when I go to Target. Now I don't, something like that. But there was this kind of sense of the tradition, this kind of sense of this is normal. It's a good thing to go to church. It's a good thing to do. It's a good, I see it being lost because I look at my friends, I even look at my friends' parents, and that kind of conservatism is, I'll even let you vote for a Democrat if you have that. I think that's a really important thing.
I can really relate to that because my dad dispensational. Yeah, not dispensational at all. That would be the more religious approach. Conservative. You know, he was a Union Democrat for most of my childhood because he works for the railroad. You know, but was always very, very conservative in terms of his values and really even in terms of his politics, and pass that along to me, and also just the selflessness to be able to always do the thing that he didn't want to do but that needed doing, which I feel like is not only lost from the culture, but I'll say it's even lost from me personally.
Yeah, right.
I am not selfless in the way that my father was selfless. And so I should give him credit for that very thing as being his greatest advice. But he did articulate advice from time to time. Never quite as good as the advice that he tried to live out, but a lot more funny. So I was at a Blockbuster Video, which, if you recall, Blockbuster Video
yes, I remember
from your Ute, people used to go and rent, Michael. They would go and rent DVDs or VHS tapes, and they would take them home and put them in a machine, and you could watch.
Was that in the old-timey days when everything was in black
it was all black and white?
You're right, okay, yeah.
Rotary telephones, the whole deal.
Yeah. And we were in a Blockbuster Video in Lubbock, the kind of big city near the small town that I'm from. And my dad and I are, looking to see what we're going to get or whatever. And this guy comes in, and back then there were late fees. That's the other thing. You had late fees, and what that is a fee for being late in returning the disc or VHS. So, guy's up at the front. He wants to rent something new, and the little 16-year-old girl or whatever running the counter can't help him because you can't rent something when you have late fees. And she's like, "Sir, I'm sorry. The system says you owe us $13.50, and I'd be happy to process that payment if you want to make it." He's like, "This is an outrage. I don't have $13.50. I'm here to rent Splash 2 or whatever it was he was into."
That was a good one.
Yeah. How dare you? I want to talk to your manager. And the girl starts to get very upset. She's quite young, and this is a grown man, and he's being very aggressive. And she starts to kind of get flustered and a little teary, and her voice is breaking, and he just is relentless. I actually believe she eventually let him just rent the DVD. And my father, I remember this like it was yesterday, turns to me and he says, "Son, never be an asshole over $13.50.
Excellent advice.
Great.
Yeah,
that's important. Has stood me well. Has stood the test of time.
So for me, there were a couple. So one was that when I was in junior high, I had already skipped third grade, and went to junior high. I went to a highly gifted magnet. So you had to take an IQ test to get into this magnet school. And I got in, but I was certainly not the person with the highest IQ there. There were people who, there was a girl there who had, I remember, a 180 IQ.
Can you even talk at that point, or are you just like,
Well, so this was the part that was actually kind of funny. So my dad basically said to me at that time that most of the time you're not going to be the smartest person in the room. Now, that's an exception here.
Yeah,
but most of the time you're not going to be the smartest person in the room, which means you really have to work extraordinarily hard. And the payoff to that story is that the girl with the 180 IQ now teaches gym at like Michigan State or something. And virtually everybody in the class who had a higher IQ than mine ended up, doing stuff that was probably less lucrative than the stuff that we do for a living. So that was piece of advice number one, which is that your natural gifts only take you a certain amount of the way. That's something my fourth grade teacher also told me. She gave me a very dark piece of advice for a fourth grader. She said, "Don't let potential be written on your tombstone." Which was really good. But
does a 9-year-old Ben say to that?
Yeah. I was like, "That's true. That's true. So true." Yeah. Dostoevsky would have put it just the same. But the other one that he always said was that never start a fight, but if you get in a fight, finish it. Which I have a feeling all of us probably heard from our dads.
Yes.
My dad actually did tell me one time I was being picked on by this kid. We'd go to the high school basketball games because I'm from a small town and there's literally nothing else to do except watch girls basketball. So the whole family's at the ball game, and I don't know, I'm probably like 11. And this high school kid would bully me anytime that I was at the gym. And so my dad kind of caught wind of this, and I don't think he understood the age dynamics at play, but he just knew someone was bullying me, and he said, "Son, you stand up for yourself. If you hit the bully back, they go away. You usually don't even have to hit the bully back. If they say they're going to punch you, just look them in the eye and say, 'Fine, then punch me. Get it over with.' We need to live. You just have to be a man." And so, here I am, and I'm 11, and I think, it's my dad. He must know. And so, sure enough, that guy, that kid pulls me aside, coming out of the bathroom of the high school gym, and he, I don't know, asked me for my money or whatever it was that he used to do, picking on me. And I said no, and he says, "Give me your money or I'll kick your butt." Probably a little bit more harsh language. And I said, "If you're going to punch me, just punch me." He did.
My father used to teach me some of the dirtiest fighting. I was in a lot of fights. I was in a lot of fist fights. And he used to, if I lost a fist fight, he would come home and say, "Let me show you something." And then he'd show me something I can't even say on the air. We'd be arrested. And you'd be like 9. I killed him. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I seem to recall you would say, I've broken my nose on a number of occasions. That might have come from that advice. You know?
Yes. So occasionally, that was one of the ways I broke my nose.
So fathers give very good advice. They don't give exclusively very good advice. We should still celebrate them with Omaha Steaks.
Omaha Steaks.
Yeah,
I love
Omaha Steaks. So, Omaha Steaks for Father's Day. Can you find a better deal? You cannot. Because right now, Omaha Steaks is giving you a limited time offer to our listeners. Go to omahasteaks.com and type in Shapiro, and in the search bar, you can get the Omaha Steak Father's Day package for just $49.99, which is 79% off. And here are all the things that you get. And I'm going to have Jeremy describe to you in delectable detail how awesome these things are, because I can't eat the steaks, but he can.
I spent the entire weekend eating the steaks.
Yeah,
this
they're
is true.
so good.
Because Omaha Steaks is such a good company, they sent me the Father's Day package. One of the 50% of non-fathers on the panel. So it's absolutely an injustice. And I thought about calling Drew and going, Drew, I think these were probably...
Okay, and these are amazing. So the Omaha Steaks, they are hand-trimmed, flash-frozen, vacuum-sealed, directly delivered to your door in the Omaha Steaks cooler, and they are customized, so you can customize your cuts for the grilling needs. And here's what you get in that special package. So you get the $49.99 package, and here's what it comes with. 2 tender filet mignons, 2 beefy top sirloins, 4 chicken fried steaks, 2 boneless pork chops, great for me. Well, not great for me, but great for Jeremy. 4 all-beef Omaha steak burgers, 4 gourmet jumbo franks, 12 ounces of all-beef meatballs, 1 pound of steakhouse fries, 4 caramel apple tartlets, 1 Omaha Steak seasoning packet, and you get 4 more grill-ready Omaha Steak burgers for free with the purchase. That's a pretty solid deal for $49.99.
It's freaking delicious, and it filled up my entire freezer.
Yep.
And then my wife thought that I had done something great, like accomplished something in my career, or possibly won the lottery. And I told her that it was true, and she should cook the steak as a sign of her appreciation of me. She did not. I instead cooked the steak with a little thyme and a little garlic, a copious amount of butter. And I will say this, as a Texan, a man who has eaten a lot of red meat in my life, sometimes for... like as a child in Texas, they wean you, with directly to red meat. I have to say, these are freaking good steaks.
It's really
they're great.
They're really good steaks.
You get the limited time package right now for $49.99 when you go to omahasteaks.com and type Shapiro in the search bar. Now, the Father's Day package to your cart. Now, you should get it for Father's Day, but the deal is available a little bit after Father's Day as well. But don't wait, because the offer does end soon. It will be available, again, to everyone who don't get your dad the thing for Father's Day because you're a lazy bum. You can still do it afterward. So go to omahasteaks.com and type Shapiro into the search bar and grab your dad and fire up the grill. And as you've heard from all of these various fine gentlemen in Knowles, the steaks are just tremendous. So check it out. omahasteaks.com, type Shapiro in the search bar.
I like Father's Day because your father is the one guy who can't actually be mad if you're late getting him the gift. We have Elisha, I think, taking some questions from the audience, from our subscribers. This is important. If you want to ask a question, you must first subscribe. If you subscribe, you get access not only to the Ben Shapiro Show, the Andrew Klavan Show, the Michael Knowles Show. You also get, as everyone I think probably knows by now, the Leftist Tears Hot or Cold Daily Wire Tumbler.
With the annual.
You must give us all of your money in order to get the tumbler. We are not generous. Elisha, what do we got?
We have lots of great questions. First, I have to say I'm totally embarrassed that I used to actually intern for John Gambling, and I had no idea that our great Andrew Klavan's father was the Gene Klavan.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, John Gambling, he was terrific. I was a news writer on his show.
Wow.
When I first started in journalism. Yeah.
I love that story. I love it so much. So, Evan asked the God King, both little G and little K, because we're not blasphemous around here, who is the better father figure to aspire to be? Kirk, Picard, Sisko, or Archer?
Well, that's a fantastic question. I don't believe that Picard was a father. Archer had a dog. He loved very much.
This is more than you should know. I'm sorry.
No, I'm saying if I can make it all the way through. Sisko was a good father. He except not the best advice to take your son to the farthest outpost in the Federation and subject them to Kardashian invasion and Klingon war. But listen, it's the future, and they have a little bit different set of mores. But Kirk is the greatest father, and here's why. Because if you are going to be a spectacularly bad father, and Kirk was certainly that, the best thing that you can do is never even introduce yourself to your son until he is 30. Stay out of the way, let him develop on his own, and then show up just in time to, save him from the Genesis experiment and all that kind of stuff.
Okay. Fascinating.
I'm glad you said it, Elisha.
That was great. Yep.
I could just barely hold in my enthusiasm.
Marshall asks, Ben, do you think utilizing bad examples is a good way to parent? For instance, to teach my kids to be nice, should I show them how mean you are to Michael Knowles and then tell my sons not to be like Ben is to Michael Knowles?
So the answer generally that is given, at least by most of the people who have studied this stuff, is that using bad examples is not good because your kid learns the bad example. So you should not like show your kids people doing terrible things and they don't do that because instead they learn to do that thing. So generally no. But in this case, with me abusing Knowles, absolutely. Totally show your kid me abusing
even
Knowles.
in adulthood, it's a problem. I remember when I first moved to LA, a little Christian guy from West Texas, and you don't know anybody, and you fall in with a group of other Christian guys who are kind of out here in the wilderness trying to make their way. And I became a part of what was, by all accounts, an accountability group, which is a Bible study, but where you don't really read the Bible. You just tell each other about all the mistakes that you're making in life. And then you're like, oh, yeah, man, oh, that's terrible. And I'll never forget that a few years later, when it sort of transitioned into more of a Bible study and we were really learning things, one of the guys missed the old accountability days. And he didn't like the Bible study because it got a little controversial and was a little bit esoteric at times. And he said, I don't like coming here and just talking about all this like philosophical stuff. I miss the old days when we used to just support each other and build each other up. And I would tell you about my mistakes and you would tell me about your mistakes. And back then, because I was teaching the Bible study at this time, but he pointed to the guy who used to teach it. And he said, back then you were the teacher and you were just I just liked it so much better than this yuck, being the teacher. I'll never forget that guy, the original teacher said, yeah, but there was always a problem. Because you know how you used to come and like talk about all the women you were sleeping with, and then we would all pray for you. You would cry. We would all pray for you. He said, yeah, it was good for me. He goes, yeah, but I had never slept with a woman. And all I could think was, my God, that sounds great.
There's some pretty good empirical support for the idea that when you see people do bad things, that you actually are more likely to think about doing those bad things yourself. It's almost like the don't think of a pink elephant effect. Right? You tell somebody, don't think of a pink elephant, immediately everybody's thinking of a pink elephant.
Yeah, I will say, Ben's abuse of me has already made me an abusive father. I don't have children yet, but I'm planning on it.
You're prepared.
See, meanwhile, I'm teaching my daughters, yes, you should treat men like Michael Knowles, how Uncle Ben treats them.
Exactly, a good example. Yeah.
Ben is totally right. They actually showed that, I guess, cigarette sales and whiskey sales went up during every season of Mad Men, that there was like this increased interest in, casually or socially smoking
and after
drinking.
watching this, right?
I know.
Yeah. Terrible to
We
drink
need some
and smoke.
alcohol sponsors over here.
But interestingly, drunk driving incidents went down during the heyday of Cheers being on the air. Because even though they all got together and drank every day, they never went out and drove drunk. It was always a point on the show that if someone was drunk, you'd make sure that they got a cab, or the other people would care for them and not allow them to go out.
Oh, wow. Interesting. Bradley asks, what do children who have bad fathers or fathers who aren't involved at all do? Where do they look to learn what it means to be a real man?
Well, I can tell you that I turned to literature as actually one of the starts of my love for literature. My father wasn't a bad person. He was a good guy, but he and I just didn't get along, and he didn't really think very much of me, and which we can understand. But but I turned to the tough guys of literature. I turned to Raymond Chandler and read about Philip Marlowe, the detective, and I turned to Dashiell Hammett and Hemingway and all those guys, and ultimately found role models in those people, guys I sculpted myself after. I imitated them. I'd imitate the way they talked, and ultimately I kind of constructed an idea of what a man should be.
Hemingway was your example of a good father?
What's that?
Hemingway was your example of a good father?
No, not my example of a good father, but of a good man, what a man was supposed to be. A man, Raymond Chandler said, down these mean streets, a man must go who is not himself mean. And that struck me as a very good role model.
I have the millennial version of that, which is obviously we don't read ever or write books.
Harry Potter.
Yeah. No, but Nick at Night was actually the answer, because when I was growing up, Nick at Night had all these cheap reruns of these shows from the 50s and 60s. So all the shows that I watched. I Love Lucy. I Love Lucy, Father Knows Best, Leave It to Beaver, all these. And that really does, or Archie Bunker, that's why I like Donald Trump. And so there were all of these great examples of father figures that are utterly absent on modern television.
So this is actually really fascinating. So for those who don't know, I wrote an entire book about the history of television. And one of the chapters in the book, I talk about the evolution of fatherhood on TV. And there is this amazing evolution of fatherhood that happened for social reasons, where the left started pushing the idea that a woman was liberated if there was no father in the home. And, everything from Murphy Brown to The Simpsons basically portrays fatherhood as useless. If you are a father, the most famous fathers on TV in the last 30 years have all been doofuses.
Right.
I mean, Homer Simpson is a doofus. Phil Dunphy, who's seen as like a good guy, he's still a doofus. He's an idiot on Modern Family.
I actually think Modern Family is the best written comedy on network television. I can't watch it because of Phil.
Because they make Phil an idiot, right? Every father on TV, every major show on TV has a father. John Goodman on Roseanne. Every father on TV is either backwards or stupid or just a bloviating dolt. And that's not how all of these things were modeled. Like if you go back and you watch Dick Van Dyke Show, Dick Van Dyke is a good father, right? He's somebody who, even though he's kind of klutzy, he's a good guy who actually knows what he's doing for the most part. And that's certainly true in shows like Father Knows Best or The Waltons, which I grew up on. My dad used to go to Eddie Brandt's Saturday Matinee and rent all those tapes. He used to watch nothing but old shows. And there was this purposeful attempt in the 1970s and 80s to move away from the model of the father who, at the end of the show, would actually try to model a behavior. The last gasp of it probably was actually Family Ties, right? Because the dad in Family Ties but he was a liberal, right? So the idea was that he was a liberal lecturing his wayward conservative son, Michael J. Fox, about why he shouldn't be conservative anymore. But TV has moved to, you can't name a good dad on TV.
Because by making the husband-father character on television a lovable doofus, they're at least making him lovable. And if they present him as masculine and strong, he is not lovable in the sort of value set of the people who write most shows.
But this is what's so hilarious is that if you actually watch the sitcoms that work, the ones that work now are the ones that actually have a deeply conservative character who immediately becomes the most popular character on the show because he's the de facto father figure, right? If you watch Parks and Rec and you look at Ron Swanson is the most popular character on the show, and he is Leslie Knope's father figure. She comes to him for advice. He tells her what to do. He's grumpy. He's conservative. The same thing is true of Alec Baldwin in 30 Rock. Right? He does the same thing for Tina Fey. It's exactly the same sort of thing.
It really speaks to a larger issue of the responsibility of the people who make these things, that they actually are, one of the things we heard, especially as the 60s and 70s and 80s came on, is we would hear from sports figures and we'd hear from actors, well, I'm not a role model. I just do this for a living. But they actually are. They actually, with their fame, as Spider-Man will tell them, with those who have much, have great responsibility. These things really do shape people.
This is the part that drives me nuts.
And they give us a chance to look for something that maybe we can't find at home.
And it drives me up a wall because you see all these people who are immensely wealthy, immensely successful. It's not like they can't afford to get married. Right? They have 2 kids out of wedlock and they're still not married. And it's like, why are you not married? Like, what sort of example are you setting not only for your own kids, but what sort of example are you setting for the society at large? Charles Murray has a great book called Coming Apart about this exact phenomenon where you have a bunch of kind of white liberals, upper crust liberals, who don't actually live this sort of lifestyle. They actually get married, they actually have kids, but then they tell everybody that it's bad to get married and have kids. And so everybody who's watching the culture, they say, oh, you're right, it's bad to get married and have kids because look what they're saying on TV. But all the rich white liberals are still getting married and having kids. Like the marriage rates among rich white liberals are much higher than the marriage rates among poor white people living in Appalachia.
He has the line, they don't preach what they practice, which I think is this incredible insistence on tolerance and open-mindedness that actually broke down the walls of the good kind of discrimination, which is discrimination between good and bad, discrimination between wise and unwise. And they've thrown that away with the other kinds of discrimination, which maybe aren't so good.
The marriage rates from boomers to the millennials have dropped from 91% down to, at the rosiest expectations, 70% among millennials. That number's been dropping over generations, but that is very low, and it could be lower than that. Where does that come from? It comes from the culture that you're stewed in, that you're raised up in.
And they're lying to everybody, by the way. When they say that great happiness is in avoiding marriage and pursuing career, these people are idiots. Idiots. The truth is that marriage is the greatest thing that has happened to women, and it is the greatest thing that has happened to men. Marriage is a wonderful, wonderful thing. Every poll ever done shows that married people are happier than single people. And by the way, have happier sex lives than single people as well, despite all the mythology that you see on television. And what the studies also tend to show, this one's interesting, I kind of like this one. What they show about having kids is that people who either have no kids or many kids are happiest. If you have 1 kid, you're not as happy because you've poured all of your hopes and dreams into this one child. But if you have 7 kids, you're like, okay, they're running around, they're like knocking each other over. And as a society, we've decided that we're not going to make the decisions that are necessary to preserve our own happiness. And that's why you're seeing a bunch of people who are, particularly for women who actually do have a biological clock. Like I can get married at 50 and he's still going to have kids. But if a girl gets married at 45, she might be done at that point. Exactly.
Before we continue, I want to let Alicia go and say thank you, Alicia, for those great questions. We'll see you in a few minutes. If you want to reach out to Alicia right now so that you can get a question in to the panel or to any of our guests who are coming up throughout the rest of the broadcast, head on over to thedailywire.com, become a premium subscriber. You can give us $9.99 a month, or you can become an annual subscriber. You will get the Leftist Tears hot or cold tumbler. It is the best way to drink Leftist Tears.
It's scientifically
approved, scientifically proven.
I just want to address this thing about happiness. When they always take these polls about happiness, a lot of times I've heard them say, well, parents with their children at home are not that happy. You know, happiness is kind of overrated. I mean, happiness is something you feel when things are going well, which is great, and everybody loves it. But the thing about having children is they make you more alive. You are both happier and sadder. You are both more afraid and more hopeful. Everything about life becomes bigger and more dimensional and adds dimensions you thought you were seeing in 3 dimensions, but suddenly you realize you weren't at all.
This is my whole theory about the spectrum of life. So when you are single, then your spectrum of happiness and sadness goes down to a 0 and up to maybe a 7. And then when you get married, your spectrum of happiness goes down to a -10 and up to a 15. Right, and because now you actually care about what happens to the other person. Like when you're single, you don't have another person to worry about. When something happens to your spouse, it's obviously awful for you. And when something great is happening with you and your spouse, it's just wonderful. And then when you have kids, then all barriers are removed. Yeah. Then it's the worst stuff that has ever happened. When something bad happens to your kid, it is the worst thing that has ever happened to you in the history of time. And when something great happens with your kid, it is the best thing that has ever happened to you in the history of time. It's an incredible, incredible thing. And you don't really, I say that getting people to have kids is sort of like a cult. You're recruiting them into a cult. You don't tell them about the downside. You only tell them about the upside. And then once they're in and they realize that they're in this cult and they have that tattoo of the children, you know, then they can't get out. And then it's their job to recruit others into the cult of having children.
I want to talk more about that. And in particular, I don't have children, so I don't try to recruit people into that cult. But I do often tell people, including the people who work for us, which I'm almost sure will cost us our company at some point in a future court settlement, that the best way to become a happier person right now would be to walk out onto the street and just marry the first member of the opposite sex who passes you by.
There's a lot of homeless people out here, dude.
Yeah. But that marriage is so fulfilling and changes you so fundamentally.
In and of itself.
In and of itself, that you should pursue it. Let's get to that, but first let's talk about Expressvpn. Another one of our sponsors for tonight has made it possible for us to have this thrilling conversation, and more importantly, these delicious Cuban cigars.
You may have noticed that AT&T and Time Warner actually merged today. So there's a judge who ruled that merger could go forward. Well, good for them, except for the fact that there are all these massive companies, and they all have control over your data, and they're using that data for many a thing. So Michael Knowles, you surf the internet a fair bit. What do you do with that internet? Your wife is watching.
Well, this is the real thing. If you guys are anything like me, I think you fellas are. Maybe you look at some weird stuff on the internet. I'm talking about the Daily Wire. I don't know what you were thinking. I'm talking about the Daily Wire. And I really have used VPNs a long time. From my first political campaign I ever worked on, a political operative said, you got to use VPNs because everybody is looking at your data. And we know this now. I mean, how many emails have you gotten in the last 3 weeks? Privacy alert, all your data is being thrown everywhere. It's being, all these internet service providers, all the tech companies, right? VPNs, Expressvpn is really, really good. It is rated #1 by Tech Radar. It is less than $7 a month. You can protect all of your information, your IP address. Your wife might still be looking over your shoulder, so watch out. But other than that, it is really good, and it's a must-have. In today's world, you need to use a VPN or you're crazy. I mean, your information is everywhere. You have got to use it. They have blazing fast service. It's very inexpensive. It's really good.
I was, after talking to Knowles today, I installed it today. It took me about 90 seconds.
Yeah, really. And then it runs in the background on your computer and on your phone. It's really, really convenient. Yeah. And right now, you can have a special deal. Go over to expressvpn.com/Ben. You get your first 3 months for free. So expressvpn.com/Ben. When you buy a 1-year package, you get your first 3 months for free. And every day you're using the internet without ExpressVPN, you're exposing your information. So don't be that person. Don't go to Starbucks and expose your information to the public Wi-Fi. Instead, use ExpressVPN, and then you can use the public Wi-Fi, and you don't have to worry about it. expressvpn.com/Ben. And again, you get that first 3 months for free with a 1-year subscription. Again, expressvpn.com/Ben to check it out.
Does Ben get pretty much all the credit for any sales that happen? Every single one of our sponsors is using a /Ben. I noticed there's no /the God King or /Andrew Klavan.
Well, this is part of Ben's long scheme to fire me. It's not the short game; it's the long game of the
I thought it was the trapdoor he was building the hall.
I wondered what the Shark Tank was for. I like what we were talking about a second ago, which is just the idea of recruiting people into the cult of happiness. And maybe happiness is the wrong word. Maybe it's the cult of fulfillment.
Meaning or purpose,
Meaning or purpose, you're right that happiness is a shallow concept, although I do feel that a fair amount of happiness actually comes from being fulfilled, right?
Well, not to get too Aristotelian, but that's basically Aristotle's argument, right?
Yeah.
You have to the man who lives the good life in accordance with right reason and virtue ends up living a happy life over the course of their entire life. And he says specifically that if you're happy at any one given moment of your life, this does not make you a happy person. Yeah. You really only get to determine your happiness when you die, essentially, is his argument. You get to the very end of your life and you realize you lived a happy life. Actually, the best example of that in the last several weeks was the Krauthammer letter, right? Charles Krauthammer is passing away. And the letter that he wrote is just beautiful, where he said, I feel like it really was. I mean, it's like I've reached the end of my life and I really have no regrets, and I've lived the life that I wanted to live. And so, if you can reach the end of your life and that can be what it is, then you've done the right thing. And that requires actual purpose. It's not just you going to Cancun on vacation. It actually means
one of the problems for people like us, though, is that we now have to be sort of evangelists for things that were ubiquitous among all people.
You did them almost by rote.
You did them almost by rote. So obviously marriage is one of those things. Having children is another one, because they've become sort of, a spouse is a commodity now, and a child is a commodity now. You have to choose them. You have to choose them above others. You choose them in comparison to other choices that could possibly be made. Whereas in the past, the society, even if people didn't have the right values or they didn't have the right beliefs, they certainly existed in a culture where they were pointed in these directions. So, one of the things that we read about all the time is how much it will cost you to have a kid. Right. And I think about the value proposition of marriage or the value proposition of having children. It used to be that society was structured in such a way that instead of reading in the New York Times, if I have a child this year, it will cost me $250,000. Now, if you're the average American, you're making like $50,000 a year.
And if you work for Ben on the Michael Knowles show, you're making like $500 a year. Yeah.
And why? Why am I even paying that?
And so you read this staggering number. It's going to cost me $250,000. Most people never even lay eyes on $250,000. Whereas historically, there was actually a value proposition to these things.
Right.
You got married as a way of increasing your prosperity, of increasing your wealth. A spouse then gave you children, and those children were able to work in your holdings, your properties, and that increased your wealth. And then as you got older, you wanted to have many children so that as you got older, your children would eventually be able to inherit from you what you had done in life and then pour some of it back towards, some small piece of it back towards you. If you had 6 children, they each gave you 1/6 of their income. Now the state has slowly replaced all of the value that we were supposed to gain from marriage, or that we were supposed to gain from having children. And not only that, they've taken away any opportunity for you to gain value, any obvious value. If you get married, as the culture says, you will have less freedom, you will have less opportunity. Well, we know none of that's true, but because you're being fed that, nonstop, 40 hours a week, as most people engage in culture, it becomes sort of a heuristic truth. It's back there in the lizard brain as a truth. If children are going to cost you $250,000, you can't work them in your fields, or you're abusive. You're not the head of your house. In the sort of biblical marriage sense, your wife will now rule over you. In every way, they've sort of taken all the incentives and perverted them, and then replaced those incentives with the hand of the state, so that now it actually is difficult to convince people that a spouse is not a commodity. A spouse is a spouse. You have a choice, but even a choice that isn't perfect will be far superior to never choosing to take that right at all.
They've made it's really. I don't believe the state is necessarily to blame for this. I think industrialization took a lot of home economy, home businesses, and took them out to the factory. It meant children left home and went to work in the cities, which they hadn't done before. So I think it just developed with technology. But it is absolutely true that having children is now a complete outlay, and economically, that a woman has lost, a homemaker has lost her economic value that she used to have when she would do home industries and all this. And it has changed everything. But the one thing that remains true is that marriage and children is this high spiritual achievement that enriches your life with joy. So we've detached, it's a weird thing, we've detached the economic reward from the spiritual reward, which could in some sense have a good effect if people opt for the spiritual
But it's turned into the reward that you get from your spouse is that your spouse makes you happier in the generic sense. Not that your marriage makes you happier. Like there is a difference between your spouse making you happier and your marriage making you happier. Or your children
really
as you happier, just having children. Like the fact is that you put your value as a human being in your status in various things that you do. What your status is as a husband, or your status as a father, your status in a job. And we've detached all that. And so it's turned into well, what makes me happy about my spouse is that my spouse does X for me. So if my spouse doesn't do X for me, then I'm not appreciative of my spouse. And my spouse, why should I have this spouse? Why shouldn't I just go get another spouse? Or my kids aren't making me happy right now.
Because they're a commodity, and you can now shop them against other options.
That's right. I mean, the whole purpose of marriage was supposed to be that marriage made you a better person, not that it necessarily made you a happier person. Right? You were going to be a happier person because you were a better person.
Right.
But part of being a better person is learning to live with difficulty and learning to live with pain and learning to not let it all, get in your head. I mean, this is virtually every philosophy, Eastern and Western, suggests that how you respond to actual things that happen to you defines your level of happiness. It's not the stuff that happens to you that matters nearly as much as how you respond to the stuff that happens to you, whether you're a Buddhist or whether you're a Christian or whether you're a Jew. And what that really means is that as a society, we've decided that the only way that we can actually make ourselves happier is to change the material circumstances that surround us. We can become richer, or we can have more beautiful people who surround us, or we can have better kids who are more well-trained by various sources. But the reality is that what makes you a happier person, a better person, is you learning that crap happens and then you have to deal with it. And how are you going to deal with it? Are you going to deal with it in a way that's productive,
even though I think
in a way that's good or not?
Even though I think this is important and true, it is a spiritual truth, what you're saying. But it's also that in the same way that capitalism hasn't made the poor poorer, and corporations haven't made the world less free, and logging hasn't resulted in less trees, in the sense that everything the culture tells us is a lie. It is also my truth. It is also a truth I have observed that men get married and then they make more money.
No, sure.
Men have children and then they do become happier. So I completely agree with the spiritual concept that yes, true happiness is not happiness in a moment, and true fulfillment is not getting exactly what you want. And yet, married people get more of what they want, are more superficially happy, and are more deeply fulfilled.
That's totally true, but I think I would just be careful in necessary. It's usual, but not necessary.
I agree.
Meaning
with that.
that is the usual process.
Well, you
just
can
like
be
if you
married
make
badly too. I mean,
right.
That's,
I mean that's also true. But bottom line is that I think what religion teaches and what good values teach is that you make good decisions and good things generally happen to you, but not that they always happen to you. And I think it's important to separate those two things out, because otherwise people have unrealistic expectations that if something bad happens, it's because.
But I think this is what Jeremy was saying before about that if you walked out in the street and married a random woman, you'd still be happier. The point is that when you get married to someone, if you do it right, you invest yourself in other people. Mm-hmm. And once you do that, you are so liberated and so free, and you understand life so much better than you do if you're completely invested in yourself. You can be married badly, not in the sense that you marry the wrong person, but in the sense that in being married, you remain selfish, you remain independent, you remain uncaring, and that's not going to help you.
Well, I agree, and I think that's why the model of arranged marriage I'm not a fan of.
Right,
but arranged marriages did work for thousands of years for people, specifically because of the idea that you're saying.
I actually want to follow up on that, because I kind of do believe in arranged marriage. But first, I want to welcome our first guest for the night. One of, I think, the favorite people of everyone on the set, except Ben, for whom no person is happy humans.
We'll work on Ben. We'll work on you, man.
We're
Alfonso, Rachel, thanks for hanging with us tonight.
Well, thanks for having me.
Before I talk about arranged marriage, do you want to pollute your body with the fine incense?
Well, I was trying to figure, man, do I want popcorn or do I want a cigar? And driving up here, man, there's a big fire going on. And I was worried. I said, man, I'm going to go in there smelling like smoke.
You're already
I guess I ain't right. No need to worry about
that. I felt bad because I tossed my embers out the door.
See? I'm going to tell on you.
You're fired.
Well, we have some delicious options for you. Either way you want.
And you can have all of them.
What about a pipe? Can I choose?
We actually don't have
There
pipe
is no
tobacco.
pipe.
That's just prop.
Those are prop pipes.
Do you put bubbles in it? No.
Some of us have pipes.
I'll try.
Ben's
What do
pipe
you recommend? Maybe cut that. Should I bite it like Columbo? Did Columbo bite it?
Yeah.
You don't want to do that.
I know.
I do want to talk about arranged marriages for a moment before we go on, because
I thought he was lighting one for me.
I'm not that.
We're not those kinds of people. I believe in arranged marriages because all marriages are arranged marriages. The reason that arranged marriages worked in the past better than chosen marriages now is because when your marriage was arranged for you, it was a series of things. Someone was selecting on the basis of values and value. And since you weren't selecting the person, what you were really opting into was the institution. And the institution of marriage actually works quite well. Paul talks in the New Testament about what a husband is, what a wife is. And if you embrace, which it requires sacrifice on the part of both parties, if you embrace husbanding and you embrace wifing, those change you and make you better and create an institution. So people were leaning into that institution historically, not into the more superficial notions. But really, anyone who is successfully married today is in an arranged marriage. The marriage was arranged by the person that they were to the person that their spouse was. And one of the problems with treating your spouse like a commodity is it sort of presumes that the person you pick will be frozen in time. And that is the person to whom you will be married tomorrow. But if you look at your own life, you are not today the person you were yesterday.
Not everybody can afford plastic surgery.
That's right.
People might age.
But if you look back 3 years, 4, if you're like me, I look back 5 years, and I have only the most fleeting connection even to the person I was in so many ways. And I'm 9 years now into my marriage. The person I am, much different than the person my spouse married. The person she is, much different than the person that I married. And so I am living in the arranged marriage of my previous self. Well, and in that way, the only hope for success in my marriage is the same hope of the people who were married for thousands of years before, which is to lean into the institution.
That is great.
That's an excellent point.
And it is a good point that, I mean, the truth is most people are in arranged marriage in the sense that somebody fixed them up. Like most people met their wife through some sort of fix-up from somebody, some third party, and that usually wasn't just because I think that there's going to be some sort of mutual sexual attraction, right? Usually it's because you figured that you're working in the same milieu, that there's a certain level of values, and those values are going to outlast that. Like everybody's going to be old and wrinkly and ugly one day, so the values better last, because otherwise, I mean, if you're looking for a hot chick at 85, good luck to you. I mean, not everybody can be Madeleine Albright.
Or make $1 billion.
That's true.
If you make $1 billion, then even at 81, you can get a hot and sexy young wife. Policy Genius, our final sponsor, who we're going to thank tonight. We must do it because it is a fundamentally selfish affair to sit around with your fellows imbibing fine whiskey and cigars. And we must remember that we are being supported in this pursuit by the fine people over at Policy Genius.
Father's Day is coming up. If you're a new dad, then you do have certain obligations to your children. Drew, is the person in this room closest to death? What do you have to say about life insurance?
So close to death, I carry him in my hip pocket.
Would I be dead? He's close to me. Am I dead? Is that what you're saying?
I got to tell you, nobody wants to think about this, but it's always there. It's lingering over your, and people depend on you. Not just your kids, also sometimes your parents are depending on you. If you disappear, as I plan never to die. Obviously, I think that's clear. Just I'm 150 years old and still here. But eventually, it's going to happen, and you want to make sure that people are there. And Policy Genius, it's so easy. You don't have to deal with those insurance salesmen.
That's exactly
You just go on and you compare the things online. It takes a couple of minutes. They don't push anything on you, and you get to pick. You can save a lot of money, and you pick the thing you need.
And they don't just do life insurance. I took out a policy on Knowles. I wasn't supposed to say that out loud, but it's not just
very generous of you.
Yeah, exactly. There's a double indemnity clause, actually. But the Policy Genius folks, they make it easy not just to get life insurance, but also health insurance, disability insurance, and renter's insurance as well. All you have to do is go to policygenius.com. You can get quotes and apply in minutes. It is indeed that easy. You could do it right now, and you should do it right now. Or as soon as this is over, you should go do it. And because rates are their lowest in 20 years, then you're going to be getting a great deal. Go to policygenius.com. It is indeed the easy way to compare and buy life insurance. Go check it out right now, policygenius.com. You owe it to your family not to leave them in the lurch when you plot. So go check it out, policygenius.com.
And one of the things that is absolutely true, people sometimes write in and ask us questions about our sponsors on all of the shows over at the Daily Wire. You guys, obviously.
We do use these sponsors.
We use these.
Yeah, that's right.
And not only that. A word of praise for the God King. We have never been forced to take a sponsor we had any qualms about, ever. Which is amazing.
That's true.
Yeah.
All praise the God King.
All praise the God King. Whoa.
Let's hear from Elisha. I know that there have been people writing in questions for the panel. If you have questions for Zoe, who just joined us, we'd love to hear those as well. Elisha, what do we got?
Okay, so I'm not sure how logistically this would work, and I don't know if I'm included in this or not, but Raymond Hunt comes up with a pretty interesting idea. He says, guys, for the next roundtable, can you please all do it from Matt Walsh's car?
Shotgun.
Dang it. So you're in the middle of 3 kids. I should have known to yell shotgun.
I'll throw Knowles in the trunk. We can definitely do it.
Yeah, he would fit back there. He's a scrawny little man.
We actually invited Matt Walsh to join us because Matt is a father, and that seemed like one of the prerequisites for everyone on the panel not named Jeremy or Michael. Turned us down flat.
He doesn't leave that car.
True story. He turned us
stays in
down
that
flat.
car. He's not going to come out of there.
I could just see him, though, like, he wouldn't hotbox because that's not his style, but sitting in the car with a cigar, Skyping in would have been great. I mean, gosh, Rob, make that happen next time. Jake asks a much more serious question. He says, for everyone on the panel, do you think adopted children should still try to reconnect with their biological father?
So, what do you think about it?
Should you? I don't know if a person should or shouldn't. You know, circumstances are different. I don't think there's a yes or no question to that one. You know, it depends on the circumstance. It depends on the person's individual preference. I couldn't answer that.
I agree with that. I think it's a totally individual choice. I think when you're adopted, when somebody raises you, when they put their energy and their money and their time and their love into you, that's your parent. That's the person who is your father or mother. But you might want to know, just like people want to, spit in a tube and send their genetics off to a company and find out who they're related to. You might want to know where you came from physically.
One of the things that
I was just saying, and I wouldn't be so quick to judge. It's like don't feel like you wouldn't want to reconnect with them because they abandoned you or something like that.
No way.
They may have the risk. Hey, at the bottom line, that could have gone a whole nother way.
That's right.
And maybe the person was just, in a moment of compassion and say, look, I really can't do much for you, and may have to.
It may have been the greatest act of love they were capable of at that time.
Absolutely.
So it's not casting a judgment. I don't ever want to know them or anything like that. So
Yeah, and I like what you said, Drew, because I've always, and you see this portrayed again. The culture sometimes lies to us, right? Because what makes a good story isn't necessarily what makes good reality. But obviously, anytime you watch a show about an adopted child, they always go through the phase where they turn on the people who've raised them and look to the people who turned them over to be adopted. And obviously, I think that speaks to something dark in all of us. There's something going all the way back to the Garden of Eden of man wanting to forsake his own father and have the world of his own making instead of the world that God's actually placed him in. It's a beautiful thing to adopt a child. Nick Searcy, who will be with us later today, adopted his son, and it's pretty much the only thing that recommends Nick Searcy. Is the great love that he has for his son, and I think is beautifully reciprocated by his son.
Absolutely.
I have to differ a little bit, just in thinking. Obviously, everybody's different. People are raised by different adoptive families and all that. I've got some adopted relatives. I think that it's that great act of love of the birth mother to not kill you, before you're born, and to put you up for adoption. And it's a great act of love for that family to adopt you. And they're your parents. The people who adopted you and raised you as a baby, they're your parents. And I think my advice to people who are adopted is embrace them as your family. That's your family.
Don't look back. You can never look back.
That's right. Yeah.
All right, next question. Sarah asks, what advice might you give to a 29-year-old whose father has been an alcoholic and substance abuser for decades? How can an adult child help a father that they have outgrown?
Wow.
I think one of the things that they teach people who have alcoholic parents, and being a writer, I've known a lot of alcoholics, is they teach you to detach with love. That is, you cannot connect to an alcoholic the way you can connect to someone who is not an alcoholic, but you don't have to kick them to the curb.
Yeah.
So you cannot owe them the things that you would owe a father. Someone who is addicted to alcohol or drugs, that is their life. That is what they have traded for life. They have traded their lives for that substance. And that's a shame, and it's a terrible thing, and you hope that they can break it, because people, with God's help, do get out of it. But in the meantime, you have got to protect yourself. Yes. You have got to protect yourself, because you are the vehicle for the next family coming up, and you're the vehicle for the future. And you've got to say, I love you, and I'll talk to you, but I'm not going to go down this road with you, and I'm not going to show up every time you create trouble.
The key to what you just said is, with God's help, people do break out of those addictions, not with your help, and you are not God.
That's
and one of the terrible things that happens, and I think it happens to all of us at some point, especially it plays to the sort of superficial goodness that we have from kind of being raised by good people in a good culture, is that we sometimes allow that to confuse us or deceive us into thinking that we are God, and that we can fix people, that we can help people, that we can rescue people from their own choices. But, our friend, I won't say his name because he actually has a job. And if I say that he's our friend, he may lose that job. We do have a friend who often says, you can't take people's craps for them. He is a father, and I hope he one day gives that advice to his children. But it's true. You can't carry that kind of a burden for another person.
Yeah, Jeremy and I have a interesting relationship. We've been business partners for how long now? 8 years, something like that. Almost as long as both of us have been married. We've actually been business partners, which is pathetic. But, but one of the great differences between Jeremy and me is, I've said this for a long time, Jeremy's main tendency as a human being is when he sees a wounded bird on the street, he wants to pick it up and nurture it back to health. And my main tendency is to take its head off because it's wounded. I mean, come on. And I think that the happy medium is probably somewhere in the middle there, that you bring it home and you boil it.
Delicious broken bird.
It's like Jesus-like parable right there.
I've lost the track of this conversation.
I think we got sidetracked.
I guess what I'm saying is kill your parents. That's probably bad for Father's Day. No,
it's a very Oedipal.
It all goes back to ancient Greece, doesn't it?
Oh my goodness.
So this is our final question for this round, but I will be back later with more subscriber questions. Zoe asks, can you guys talk about the role that a father plays in fatherhood that is different with a boy than a son?
Yes.
Or a son or daughters, yeah.
And I noticed that there's no way. Don't women have fathers too? We don't have any women on the panel?
No.
I'm speaking up for the. I'm talking about, why is she segregated?
Yeah.
Why is she on the TV?
We're not good people. Picked up on this at any point.
You let him in for 5 minutes and we're talking intersectionality.
Yeah, really.
It's going there, man. It's going there.
You can come join me.
You're right.
Can just
Women
come
can
join
be
me.
great fathers too.
I played both the mommy and the daddy. I've been hearing that for years. Look how it's turning out.
Ben, you've got a boy and you've got a girl. Exactly the same, right from birth, yeah?
Exactly the same. I mean, except for you have to be an insane person to actually think this, right? I mean, the society that says that boys and girls are the same is the stupidest society in the history of mankind. Anyone who's ever dealt with small children, boys and girls, knows there's a difference. Okay, girls are sweet and wonderful when they are small. Okay, they actually can sit and they can play and they're really nice. And then boys are insane. Boys are just suicide machines. All they do is try and run into the street and break their face on things, and they are nuts. It is true that what a father does for a boy versus what he does for a girl. When you're a father for a girl, you spend most of your time trying to protect your girl against, and this is true throughout life, I think. You spend a lot of time trying to protect your girl from various threats from the outside, because this is the job of a man toward his wife as well. This is the job of a man toward his daughter and toward his wife, and to warn your daughter that men are not to be trifled with, right? That men can be very threatening, right? The right man can be the best thing in the world for you, but there are plenty of terrible guys out there, and it's your job as a dad to protect your daughters from that. For a son, your job is to train your son to be a gentleman, because boys either build or they destroy. There is no in between. From the time that they are small children, they're building a tower of blocks, or they are knocking down that tower of blocks, and all they do all day is this. And so if you don't train kids to be a gentleman, boys to be a gentleman, they will turn out to be jerks. They'll turn out to be destructive people. Women also, girls, I think, I have 3 younger sisters, and it seems to me that one of the big differences between teenage girls and teenage boys is that teenage boys, this is true for men generally, tend to be destructive of others, right? When they act out, they tend to lash out at others and hurt other people. They tend to not care about other people, and they tend to hurt other people. Girls tend to be self-destructive. They tend to turn it in on themselves. This is why anorexia and bulimia are so much more common among girls than among boys. They tend to really be tough on themselves, and so there is a certain amount of esteem building that has to go into being a dad toward a girl that does not have to happen with a boy. For a boy, it's mostly you keep yourself under control. And this is why you see single motherhood has an impact on girls, but it has much more of an impact on boys. When there's no father in the home to actually take care of boys, or if there's no community of fathers, right? There's a study that was just done that shows that the single greatest predictor of teenage crime is not actually only single motherhood in a particular home, it's single motherhood in a community. So if there's a community of men around, they can sometimes fill the gap that's left by a particular father in a particular community. But men have to be there to model for boys what it is to be a gentleman and to be a defender of decency as opposed to being an aggressor, because boys who are not defenders become aggressors.
Yeah. It's important for a boy to grow to be a gentleman. And I know my father told me, I'm sure your father told you, be a gentleman. Associate with other gentlemen. If there are certain clubs where gentlemen congregate.
So true.
You gotta go to those gentlemen clubs.
I'll tell you, having just recently had a bachelor party, it's so important. It's so important to us.
Hang out in gentlemen clubs.
This is, there's that great book by Harvey Mansfield called Manliness, and he talks just about this. Part of manliness, and what a father needs to teach a boy is manliness, is being a gentleman. You know, basically after Nietzsche, after God is dead, manliness can go pretty wrong. It can get pretty wild. It's kind of what they talk about on the left. They talk about toxic masculinity, right?
But they label all masculinity toxic masculinity, of course.
Yeah, smoking a cigar.
A man looks at a woman and she's pretty. Oh, it's toxic masculinity.
Right.
And also the way human beings have procreated for the last several 100,000 years. Right?
But there is a destructive part of manliness, and it's got to be restrained by being a gentleman. If you don't teach your boy to be a gentleman, he's going to grow up and be a little monster.
But even at the same time, though, when we're talking about being gentlemanly or being a man according to what, though? That's the problem, because we can talk about being a man all day, but what does that actually mean? What does that really look like? Or being a gentleman and how you're going to treat a woman and stuff like that, because we're going to have different standards and different models of what that looks like. And all of those things, they don't really have a solid foundation. So to that end, what do we look towards to be a model man, a model gentleman, a model father, a model husband? What do we look to? I mean, for myself, I think people would know that my answer is going to be the scriptures. I look to the Bible.
Father in heaven.
Exactly. I look towards him and I look at his statutes on how to do that. But I think that's one of the bigger problems, is that's one of the things that's promoted. It's like, you got to be a man. Okay, a man according to what? Yeah. So unless we really get solid with that, and a lot of people reject what the truth is on that, and that's another problem.
So one of the interesting things that God did is that he sort of condescended even in language so that we could comprehend him, right? Because what God is, we can't understand. And so God calls himself a father. And we look at that wrong. We look at our fathers. And the beginning of wisdom is you look at your father and try to understand something about God. The greater truth is that you look at God and you learn something about being a father,
right,
or about having a father.
That's why it's at the top of the list. I'm God, I'm the Lord your God. Let's get that straight first, right? It's such a truth. It's such a high truth that it's basically a law. There is no truth higher than that. And then from there, when he goes on talking about honoring your father and honoring your mother, it's like, look, you got to honor me first. You trying to honor your father and your mother, you trying to be right by everybody else, you're going to get it wrong. Your love sucks, right? Love you so that people think that God is like some megalomaniac father that just love me. It's like, no. My love will hurt you, it'll hurt you, it'll hurt you. It hurt my wife, it'll hurt my mom, it'll hurt everybody. But if I filter that through God and understand and go by his statutes and go to him to learn how to do this, then I will understand what it is to, because people be like, how do you honor, like you were asking earlier, like, about, father being an alcoholic. How do you honor a person like that? It's like, well, my father, my mother, they weren't there for me. They were this, they were that. How do I honor them? Well, you honor them by being the kind of person that a father and mother should honor, right? At least a halfway well-adjusted person should honor. That's what you do.
So you learn about, just like with the father, if God being love, as it says in John's epistle, the first step of wisdom is to understand God because of having experienced love. But the greater step is to understand love because of God. That God is not our love, but that our love should reflect.
Indeed. There's another aspect. I agree with everything you guys are saying, but we're talking a lot about training and teaching. And one of the things that a father does that's most important is represent, because a woman is defined in a lot of ways by her body. If you can have a child, you are a woman. There's a lot of other things that go into it. Obviously, being a lady. No, but it's just true. But a man is an abstraction. Manliness is an abstraction. You got to see it. You got to be there. You got to smell it. And one of the things about absent fathers is you can't smell them, you can't see them. And when you talk about, children, boys especially, learn and communicate through objects. Girls talk. Men play catch. Men play video games. They sit around, and that is how they communicate, because it's all about seeing the thing there. And when you talk about God, God sent us somebody we could see, somebody with flesh on that you can look at.
That's in the sequel, right?
That's in the sequel. You'll get to that. We're assigned to take you to that. But I think that, it's just when fathers leave, man, they take away. It's like taking the sun away from a plant. It takes away the thing that you grow toward. And all the other stuff is true, the teaching and the rules and the control, but most important is showing.
Well, this is why it's so funny. Whenever you hear people in the Me Too movement say, teach boys not to rape. Right. Like, how many people in this room, I assume nobody in this room is a rapist, right? Yeah. So, and if you are, don't say it now, because it's criminal. Okay, it's criminal and I have to report you. Or do say it and I'll go report you. But in any case, nobody, and I assume none of your fathers sat you down and said, boys, don't rape.
Right.
Of course
right?
not.
Because that's absurd. What your father did instead is modeled the decent behavior and made it clear that the expectation was that you were going to protect women. These are the things that you were going to do. You were going to protect women. I do wonder whether our culture now, since we've leveled out the sexes, the shtick on the Titanic, which is the ship is going down and now we're going to get the women and children off first. I wonder if our society would do that anymore.
No,
I really don't know.
And what you just said is interesting. When you say women and men are the same, then you've really mitigated the crime of rape, because if women are like men, they just want to have sex all the time. Only if women are different than men, only if women need to be protected by the strength of good men, is there a crime to this sort of lack of consent. I'm not saying that men can't be raped, but I'm saying that that is the extreme minority of instances.
A lot of corollaries come from this too, because you can read, when you talk about recruiting people into the cult of parenthood, you can read about this all you want, but children play every key on your piano.
This is exactly right.
And so if you are not in some way right with yourself and with God, if you're not some way adjusted and put together, they are going to find that place and hit that.
But before we continue, I want to let Alicia go so she can get some more questions for us. Alicia, thank you so much for those great questions.
See you.
If you're watching at home, you want to get a few questions in, we are going to answer a few more during the course of the broadcast, but you must first subscribe over at dailywire.com. Become a premium subscriber, either monthly or annual, although we strongly recommend annual, not only because it ensures that we get more of your delicious, delicious money, but it also ensures that you get the Leftist Tears hot or cold tumbler. It's also time to say goodbye to Zoe, but instead of that, Zoe, can you hang with us for one more segment? We're loving having you.
If you don't mind, I don't.
You got a lot more stoked there.
I do.
To get through, so we want to enjoy that.
Your cigar is still intact.
It is also time for us to thank another sponsor. That is Helix Sleep. And Ben, since you have the Helix Sleep mattress.
I have the Helix mattress.
You are the man.
Is awesome sauce. Okay, so it is great.
I only got the pillow. That's
right. Well, when you start earning, my friend, and you get the Helix Sleep mattress.
They love. Yeah.
That's right. It's time for you to aspire to something higher. So Helix Sleep mattresses are just tremendous. They are made directly for you. The way this works, you go to helixsleep.com, and they have this 2-minute sleep quiz. It asks you whether you like to sleep on your side or on your back, and how your body is structured. Do you like the mattress to be soft? Do you like it to be firm? They can even make the mattress so that it differs between the sides of the mattress for you and your spouse, now that we've recruited you into the cult of marriage. And
this is really important too, because people I'm recently married to sweet little Lisa, and so I like a mattress that's more firm, and she likes a mattress that I'm not on, and Helix Sleep can customize it.
That's exactly right, and Helix Sleep can make that happen for you. And if Helix Sleep could get rid of Knowles for me, I would buy a second mattress for Helix Sleep. The great thing about Helix Sleep is that, again, it is customized for you. It comes in the mail, you unpack it, it actually inflates right in front of you because it's foam, and you throw it on the bed, and you are ready to go. And for Father's Day, right now, you can go to helixsleep.com/Ben and get up to $125 toward your mattress order. Again, that's helixsleep.com/Ben, and you get up to $125 toward that mattress order. It's, again, the most comfortable mattress I've slept on. We took a more expensive mattress and actually moved it out of the room because this is a better mattress. helixsleep.com/Ben for your $125 off, and it's a perfect Father's Day gift. It's really excellent. Check it out, helixsleep.com/Ben.
That's awesome. And Ben, before we cut to the ad, you were getting ready to say something profound. I'm a pretty good judge. Like, Drew will start to say something, I'm like, no. But I could tell the twinkle in your eye.
Now, I was thinking about the disconnect that people seem to have between also their daughters and how they treat women. So I think one of the things that you're talking about is how, having kids changes you. When you have a daughter, you see this with a lot of men. It's on the new Kanye album, which I've apparently now been forced to listen to because Kanye's pro-Trump, and that means that we all must listen to Kanye West, apparently. Not my cup of tea, but his new album has a whole song on there about how he has a new daughter, and now it's changed his perspective on Me Too. That's right after the song where he talks about how he has 2 eyes and therefore women have 2 breasts. So it hasn't completely permeated his experience in life.
I guess.
Yeah, exactly. It hasn't completely permeated his worldview yet, I think. But nonetheless, it is true that all these guys who will treat women like dirt, like grown women like dirt, the minute they have a daughter, they realize that if a man treated their daughter like that, they would murder that human being.
Well,
like if you ever cross my daughter, I would kill you.
The advice your father gave you, right?
Yep, and it matters too. When you talk about being an example, you're also being an example to your daughter of what a man is like. Which is why I always tell people the first thing is be good to your wife, because that is going to mean everything to your kids.
So many women, they have the fathers who are bad, and then they end up with men who are bad because their father was bad. People tend to marry their parents. It's very weird.
They don't know. They don't know that they can expand. I really do believe people can get past that. I don't believe we're locked into this Freudian circle, but you got to be careful. If your father was a bad guy, you got to be careful not to imitate that.
So you're a father to a daughter. How do you navigate that?
I have cats. and that's a weird thing, because I'm like thinking, man, and I'm glad to be here, man, but I was like, how did I get better for yourself? I don't have any kids, and my dad wasn't really involved in my life.
Wait a minute.
Did you guys
get
out? She said with Larry Elder or something? What was I saying? No, but in the culture, it's played up a lot. We see the ads, don't forget to be a father today.
Yeah.
And it's like, no, don't forget to be a husband.
Yeah.
The best, it's like, because we hear it all the time, the most important thing in my life are my kids, man. My kids, whether they're separated or whether they're together, it's like, no. The most important person in your life is supposed to be your spouse. You know, actually, I mean, really, the most important a person is supposed to be in your life is the Lord Himself, who teaches you how to love your spouse. Like I was saying earlier, my love will hurt my spouse, so I don't dare try to love her on my own accord. I go to the Lord to learn how to love her right. You know, the Lord who says, "Hey, you need to love her like I'd lay down my life for my church. I'll lay down my life for you." You know, and of course, I'm no good to my wife dead. You know, but at the same time, it's like, you know, this
you go to policygenius.com.
Now that's a plug right there. Do I get a cut of that? I set you up for a nice plug. Policy Genius.
Well, this is actually a good question, I think. You know, since some of us, all of us are married, but only 2 of us have kids. So if you, what is your priority, right? If you have to choose, like, is it wife or is it kids? Like, what is your first priority? Because people tend to build their lives around this specific question. My view has always been that the whole purpose of marriage is the procreation and raising of the children in the end. Like, if you have to boil down marriage to its societal impact, while it's great for people who are married, the difference between, in my view, traditional marriage and same-sex marriage, for example, is that there are certain marriages that produce children, and the whole reason that God cares whether you marry another human being as opposed to just sleeping and staying in a relationship with another human being is that you've locked yourself in for the benefit of those children. And if you have your mind on that, then it's better. But, you know, I could see that argument be made the other way. I know Dr. Laura always used to make the argument the other way, that your spouse is your first priority and your kids are your second priority. I tend to think the opposite. Maybe it's because my dad raised me this way, that the kids are the first priority and your spouse is an adult. So your spouse is sort of second priority. How do you view that one?
I don't actually think I can. I think the question is not phrased in a way that I can actually answer it, because the way I feel about parents is that they are their children's world. I frequently see people get divorced for bad reasons with young kids, and they say, oh, the kids are fine. And I think, yeah, the kids are fine. You just blew up their planet.
Right.
You just blew up their planet. So you have to tend that planet for them to live on. I mean, that is the thing. So you can say the kids are coming first, but in order for the kids to come first, the wife has to come first. I mean, in other words,
you have to cultivate your marriage. You have to have a good marriage model.
That planet has got to be a great place for them to live, and it's got to be a place where they see the values taking place, and they see everything happening the way it's supposed to happen.
Yeah, like so many things, I've heard something stated in a way that I believed it was true, and the very same thing but stated differently, and thus I believe it is false. My aunt once told me that you have to love your spouse more than your children. She said, you know, if one of my children was drowning and my spouse was drowning, I would save my spouse. And it bothered me at the time because I was quite young, and I thought, you know, I was the center of the universe. Kids are the center of the universe. What I came to realize is that part of what she's saying is that you actually so owe your children the planet that it is that, you know, because she had other children. It was, you know, she's not saying would I save all of my children, but I think what she's saying is my children need a father. They need a father so much that it is worth saving my father for my other children. Even at that expense. And that's such an unpopular sentiment now that we reject it. But how she phrased it to me was...
Now you save your dog and you let everybody...
Yeah, exactly. Thank you, Dennis Prager. On another occasion, a close friend of mine, her father said to her sister in a time of struggle, you know, I can have other children, but I'm the only father you will ever have. And he's saying something that is mathematically equal to what my aunt said. The difference is my aunt and my uncle are fabulous parents and have raised wonderful children. And this particular father, if we ever encounter him as a group, because none of us are very strong individually, but as a group, we would most certainly murder him. And then we would all get together for the next cigar show. And it would kind of occur to me, like halfway through, like, wait, you guys remember when we murdered that guy? And you'd all be like, oh yeah, I haven't thought about it a single time since, you know, has not even crossed my mind. I sleep like a baby. But I think that's the key, right? When you're saying, do you prefer your child or do you prefer your spouse? Not having a child, I can only think that the answer to that is you prefer your children in the preference of your spouse. It's not a one or.
That's right.
It's being a good husband is the prerequisite to being a great father.
The best way to show your value for your kids is to show the value for your spouse. That's what's really, because we look at it, I mean, with the divorce rate and the way relationships are now, you just see, you know, generations coming up, and these cats are like broken. They're so insecure, and we wonder why people melt down so easily. Well, because their parental units melted down. You know, and you see people that don't want to take responsibility for nothing. They're ready to cast blame. Well, they learned that from their folks. They don't want to take responsibility for the dissolution of their marriage, and they cast blame on each other. Where do you think they learned that from? You know, so it's like, look, And I hear people who are are no longer in their marriage anymore, and they talk about how much they love their kids and stuff like this. So why don't you have that grace for the person you created the kids with? Where all that patience and all that acceptance and all this love that you want to pour into your kids, really it's a self-righteous guise, really. You're trying to redeem yourself somehow for how much you love your children. Where was that grace for your spouse?
Yeah.
Show that. And I would posture that our generations would look a whole lot different. We would have more solid people. We would have all these snowflakes that are just melting down so easily if they come to grips with that.
Well, there is, now in the culture, there are all these false dichotomies. So we redefine marriage and we say, well, I love my spouse so much. I love this life. I don't want to have kids. I just don't want to do it. I won't. And having been recently through a Catholic marriage ceremony, they're very pro-kids and very pro-life. And there was this old unity of the idea, right? This unity of the family. I love my spouse. I am open to life. If you say that you're not open to having kids, that Catholic Church, I think I'm the sole papist on the panel, they will not give you a marriage license.
Yeah.
Not everybody gets to have kids. A lot of people can't have kids. But the openness to it is that unity. If you're open to life, you're going to love your spouse more. If you love your spouse, it's that one thing. To say that they're opposed is crazy.
The lie is that people see them. They think they love their child because they see themselves in their child, but they hate their spouse for the same reason.
This is though what we're really talking about. All this, almost in this entire conversation, the great Jewish toast, L'chaim. We are actually talking about life.
Right.
Being open to life, being open to the procreation of life, the continuation of life, the dedication to life.
Pro-life.
It's pro-life. It's all about that.
This is also what makes politics important. So in our normal day jobs, we're all talking about politics and not fatherhood. But this is why I think that politics actually is important, because otherwise, if you're not talking about what you're doing for the next generation, what you're doing for your kids, and how you raise those kids, then what the hell are you talking about?
You're not talking about anything.
You're not talking about anything.
That's absolutely right.
And our politics has become not about that, right? We won't even talk about the ones that are like the most basic. There are certain basic issues that obviously affect our children, and we refuse to talk about them because we're such a selfish people at this point. Obviously, the breakdown of the entitlement programs that all of our kids are going to have to pay for, but we don't give a crap about it because the baby boomer generation wants its money, and we want our money, and that means that our kids are going to have to pay for that. Or whether it comes to there's this tremendous lack of self-confidence in how to educate our children that's happening right now. I'm not going to put my values on my kid, because if I put my values on my kid, then that's me imposing my worldview on my kid. And how could I possibly impose my worldview on my kid? Look, a worldview is going to get imposed on your kid because your kid is not capable of making decisions, which means that it's up to you now. You need to decide what you believe. And this is one of the things that when you're parents, I think when you first have kids, this is true when you're married, to a certain extent, because you have to figure out whether you have common values with your spouse, which is why I always say don't date interpolitically, interreligiously, or intervalues-wise. I think that generally speaking, you should be dating people who share values. It gives you the best odds of success. Some of these other things work, but the best odds of success, you're dating somebody who has the same values. Once you have kids, then whatever you thought that your giant kind of panoply of values has to narrow down to the values you are willing to teach your kids. What's the set of values that you're going to teach your kids? And this has sort of been my interpretation of the most bizarre. You guys have gotten to talk a lot in New Testament, so bear with me now. We're going to go old school. So
I love that book.
I'm a fan. I'm a fan. I wear a hat and everything. Like I am a fan of this book. So the most puzzling aspect of the Old Testament, obviously, is the sacrifice of Isaac, which everyone has puzzled over for generations. And Kierkegaard came up with the idea of the teleological leap beyond reason and all of this. But I think that what that story is really trying to say is not that God wants your child to die on an altar. I think what that story is really trying to say is, to put it in the Jewish context, when I decide to raise my kid Jewish, I'm making a specific decision to put my child at risk. And when I was in law school, there was a guy who I was going to law school with, his name was Mike, and a Jewish guy. And he said specifically he did not want to get married to a Jewish person and raise his kid Jewish, because he said the single greatest risk factor I can add to that kid's life is making that kid Jewish, considering the amount of anti-Semitism in the world. So why not just move out of it, and then I don't have to worry about it anymore, which is not the worst logic, right? I mean, if you actually want to protect your child, if your chief goal in life is to protect your child, you're going to bring your child up in the way that is least likely to put them in a risky situation. They don't have to stand for anything, because standing for things means you're also most likely to get knocked down. Well, I think that what the sacrifice of Isaac really is saying, when you read the story, is pretty clear, actually, is God is saying, are you willing to sacrifice your child to me? Not in the sense like, I want you to kill your child. Are you willing to heighten the risk factor for your child's life by teaching them values that put them more at risk in the world? And standing for things makes you more at risk in the world. Standing for things makes you more likely to become the target of people who don't like your value system. And so and the easy way in America, in a free country, the easiest way to bring up your kids is to say no value system at all, go to public school, imbibe whatever you imbibe from the culture, we'll all get along, it'll all be great. But that doesn't create the warriors necessary to defend the Western civilization that's going to promote the possibility of a further generation, because that line runs out pretty darn quickly. And so we have to decide, all of us as parents and prospective parents, what are the values that you want to pass down to your child? And you have to have the self-confidence, and in my view, the scriptural confidence, to say, these are the values that are worthy of passing down to my child and worthy of me making my child's life more risky.
And I can tell you, by the way, just as somebody who has older children, grown children, that the proudest moments in your life, the best moments in your life, are those moments when your children turn to the wave of culture and say, no, I'm not going to do it. I'm doing it the right way. When that happens to you, you just think like, hey, I'm going to heaven.
When your kids do the right way,
that toaster in heaven.
you can even see it in little kids. When you see little kids do the right thing,
yep,
it's an amazing thing.
Amazing
it's an amazing
thing.
thing. The other day, my daughter did something wrong, and she lied. And I said, sweetheart, you're not allowed to lie. You're not allowed to lie. I'm upset at you because you lied. And she started crying because she felt guilty. And then she said, Daddy, I love you. I'm never going to lie again. And then she wouldn't get off it. Like for a while, she was really like very upset that she had lied. She said, she said, I'm embarrassed that I lied. She's very smart for a 4-year-old. And I thought, now this is a good thing. I'm creating a good person here, right? I'm partnering with God and my wife in the creation of a better human being, not just in the inception of this human being, but in the raising of this human being. You become partners with God in raising your child. And if you don't take that partnership seriously, then you end up with a kid who doesn't have a God and doesn't have a childhood and doesn't have a decent adulthood. I think.
She feels guilty in front of you because you model that to her.
Right, exactly.
She knows it, yeah.
And what better way to facilitate somebody, when they're talking about, a child should be able to make their own decisions and stuff like that. Yeah, I agree. But just like anything else, don't you want to give them something foundational? Don't you want to have them to have like a level, a level foundation and a clear perspective on how to make decisions for themselves? It's not imposed. It's like, look, I'm not going to take this Bible, I'm going to beat you over the head with it. It's my responsibility to make sure that you understand what it is to make the choice. It's like, hey, when you had that, the situation with Adam and Eve, Old Testament, right? You got that situation with Adam and Eve. Wouldn't it have been nice if Adam would have sought the counsel of God? So you got Adam, hey, Pops, I see the snake is trying to push up on my woman right now. I'm not quite sure, because he's right there. He's standing right there, and he has no excuse not to seek the counsel of God to understand what it is that he's supposed to do.
But what does he do instead? He hides in the bushes.
Yeah, just like, y'all go ahead and do your thing. But but there was no excuse for that. And even and speaking of a Father's Day thing, what greater story between a father and a son and his bride? Now, because we're talking about the bride. The one who speaking of Isaac, Abraham, and speaking of father and the son, and the sacrifices that are made, the sacrifice to show the love for the son, the show of love for the father, and the show of love for the bride. I mean, this all plays in, and this is something, there's a lapse somewhere in the culture of where this is missing, where we're supposed to line up, or where our priorities in love are supposed to be between a man and a woman and their children.
That's why the first great gift you can give to your children is to model being a father and husband. And that's the answer to your question from a minute ago. Mm-hmm. If God is father and husband, you can't, you can't. It will be much harder for you to pass the values of monotheism, of Judaism and Christianity onto your child if you have not first modeled for them what it even is to be a good father.
I'll say the second great gift is to say no to your kid.
Yeah. You notice when he says Judaism, he points to him, and he says Christianity, he points to Zoe, you and me.
And if you're a rotten pagan.
you never go to the papist. So thank you so much for hanging with us today.
Great to see you, Bob.
We really appreciate you making some time for us. And
kept the seat warm for Brother Nick.
We're talking about the International Film and Television Star.
Peabody Award-winning.
Peabody Award-winning.
Thank you, Zoe.
All right, y'all.
See you, Zoe.
Thank you.
Somebody's going to certainly come help Zoe with that, whatever that
He's going to stand there awkwardly and we're just going to film it the whole time.
And I'll use this moment to say, if you are not a subscriber over at the Daily Wire, if you are not giving us your sweet, sweet money on a monthly or annual basis,
give me the shekels.
There are things you are missing, among which are being able to write to Elisha Krauss over in the green room and ask questions of the panel. If you have questions on fatherhood, if you have questions on what it means to be a husband, what it means to be a man in today's world, if you just want to share with us some story about the advice that your father may have given to you, I think your chance is now. We're going to take questions one more time. Again, dailywire.com. Become a subscriber. Get the Leftist Tears Hot or Cold Tumbler. Get the live broadcast of the Ben Shapiro Show, the Andrew Klavan Show, the Michael Knowles Show. Also access to all of our back catalog. Ask questions during the conversation. Is it worth it? Yes. I'm just going to go with yes. And you know, one of the, as we've talked about all of these things today, I've got a real sense of gratitude toward my parents, and Ben, I know you do too, for enduring the difficulties of marriage on our behalf. Because at the end of the day, you know, children aren't the only reason you can have a successful marriage, but I think that in most instances, children are part of the glue that keeps marriages healthy and functioning. And
they're also an obstacle. I mean, let's be real about this. Kids do make marriage harder. I mean, there's no question that you lose more time, that you have to spend more time. There's more stress. You're more stressed out. I mean, you're more tired. These are just things that happen when you have kids. And it should make you more grateful. One of the big things is making sure that you're more grateful to your spouse for helping you out with this burden, as opposed to angry at your spouse for having to, you know, do things that you don't want to do right now. It is a glue that kids are a glue that holds families together, but they can also be a real divisive force if you are not willing to acknowledge what it is that your spouse is doing for you, and also if you are not willing to see when you're wrong. Like you know, the old joke is that, you know, the first words that you should say when you wake up in the morning to your wife is, "I'm sorry." Just get it out of the way, like, really early. But it is true that I think that what makes you a better human being in regards to marriage is recognizing when you're wrong. And it's a hard thing to do, especially when you're tired and you're grumpy, to stop for a second and just say, is there a point here? Like, is it really true I'm being a jerk? Because sometimes you really are being a jerk. And if you can do that, then I think that that's also something else to model for kids, because kids need to learn to say that they are wrong. If kids never believe they're wrong, the self-esteem movement has done more damage to children than any other thing that's happened over the last 50 years in this country.
The whole idea that you're supposed to express your emotions, I think we probably agree on this.
Yes, you know, no emotions.
Hey, it's not that you don't have emotions, but if you're annoyed with your spouse.
We disagree then.
Yeah. Well, one of us has.
I like the sort of British approach. You can have emotions.
Exactly.
You should just be ashamed of yourself if anyone knows.
Bury them down into a beautiful stomach ulcer and let it just over time.
But it's a good thing to be able to say to your wife, "I'm annoyed," without saying, "You stupid hag." You know,
right.
Well, if you're going to occupy a life with another human being, another adult human being, and you don't grant them the freedom to criticize you,
right?
If you don't, then you're not allowing. Part of what God gives us in marriage is a mirror by which we get to see our own faults and flaws through the pain that I mean, it's a horrible. It's not horrible. It's beautiful, but it's tragic that we see our rough spots through the damage that they can sometimes inflict on this person who we love, who we're making decisions with, who is in this battle with us. And it's through that we learn the places that we need to make improvements in ourselves. If you don't grant your spouse that freedom.
When you're single, you think you're perfect.
That's right.
You really do. Yeah. When you're single, you think you're perfect. And then you're married and you realize how screwed up you are. And it's good for you. It's actually good for you.
And you can be perfect as long as women don't fly and swim into your can. I think men can be absolutely perfect as long as there are no women. I think it's the minute women show up, you think like, oh, I get it. I stink, you know?
So we have Nick Searcy is about to join us, and I just got to tell you guys, nervous.
I know.
Nervous,
yeah, because
he's such an international star.
There are stars.
Yeah.
There are film stars.
Right.
There are television stars.
There are national
stars. There are Academy Award-winning stars.
Yeah.
There are far fewer, statistically, Peabody Award-winning stars. And I'm going to tell you guys a story about Nick before he comes in. For those who don't know Nick's a better guy than he wants you to think that he is.
It's true.
But Nick...
He was in every Oscar-nominated film
of the last year. He was in every Oscar-nominated film of the last year. Nick...
there he is.
I thought I'd dress up, you know.
Yeah.
It's the modesty, I think, that really carries him.
Special occasions, you know.
So this is a true story about Nick, and they're going to come help Nick get mic'd up and plugged in. But Nick and I were together when we first encountered Donald Trump. And now, I have known Nick Searcy for quite some time, been an admirer because he leaves you really no option but to be an admirer.
He demands.
Either that or be gone.
Yeah. And Nick is a shameless self-promoter. And there we were, sitting at an event that we were hosting, and the future president of the United States walks in to give one of his first political speeches. This is 7 or 10 days after he announces for the presidency. And no stand-up comedy show I've ever been to compares. Oh. He was much funnier then because it was shocking then, we hadn't encountered.
It was the funniest thing I've ever seen.
And I looked over at Nick halfway through this and I thought, you have faded. Like he is three times the Nick Searcy that you are.
It's like he took my acting school thing and just became president with it. No.
Nick, thanks for hanging out with us. You want a stogie?
No. Yes, I do.
We have for you a limited edition Romeo and Juliet, straight from Slave Island.
Brought back with our own hands, I believe.
Brought back with our own hands.
Gosh, this is great.
Yeah.
Amazing. Oh, this is great. Thank you.
If you don't like it, blame Drew. He picked it.
Well, the best part of that Donald Trump thing is that I wasn't even going to go because I thought this guy's a joke. I don't even want to see this, but he said that thing, and then we're not on yet, right?
No.
Gary sent out that thing that said, it's going to be kind of protests outside, so it might be a good idea to take an Uber or something.
Yeah.
And so I said,
500 protesters outside our event, helicopters overhead.
And so Mark and I decided to go, but I decided to wear my Lucha Libre wrestling mask. So I had on like a white suit and a Lucha Libre mask. And we went by the protesters, and they were outside going, "We are men too, Trump is racist, and they see me and they go, "Lucha Libre! Bill Mascaras!" They start yelling and screaming, and I'm doing this. Some media guy comes up with a microphone and goes, "Why are you wearing a mask?" I go, "This is a top secret organization. I cannot reveal my true identity."
Also, Nick Searcy, NickSearcy.com, acting school by Nick Searcy, because he doesn't. Not one time has anybody asked Nick why he's doing something, and he said, "It's a secret. I don't want you to know who I am." That has never happened. Nick, we're talking about fatherhood. We're talking about being a husband, being a man, because obviously it's Father's Day. I actually told a story about you before you got here. It was generous. It was generous. It's the kindest thing I've said.
The only nice thing I've ever heard him say about it.
Very strange. I don't trust that.
But you occupy a unique space because you're the only person that we're talking to tonight who has adopted a son. And we talked a little bit about it in your absence, but I'd love to just hear your perspective on what it is to be father to a child that you chose. I mean, that's a unique situation.
Yeah, it was unique. I mean, we have a daughter, Chloe, who's 28 and grown, and
older than your son.
Yes, she's 28 years old. Yeah. But that's sort of how it came about. Is that Leslie and I were wanting to have another child, and we tried some various things, and not to go into detail, but didn't
never
work.
Tried sex, right?
Didn't work for whatever reason. And so we were talking one night, and Leslie was like, "Why do you think you want another child?" I said, "Well, honestly, I guess having had the experience of raising a girl, I would like to try to have the experience of raising a boy too." And Leslie said, "Well, there's no guarantee that if I got pregnant it'd be a boy, so why don't we just go adopt one?" That made sense, and my daughter brought home a thing from school that had Child Social Services number on it. Said every child needs a home, and Chloe handed it to us and said, "They do." Chloe's about 11. So we went through the process and just became foster parents. We decided we wanted to adopt out of the foster care system, and that's just kind of how it came about. And we got qualified to be foster parents, and then immediately when you get qualified, they just start calling you up. And no matter what you told them that you wanted, they're like going, "We've got triplets here that, and so we met a, number of situations that, were kind of heartbreaking, but sort of wrong for us, And my wife was looking for a child that was 5 years old so that it would go to school the next year. But we met Omar, who was with a family that he'd been with since he was 2 weeks old, I think, and that family was leaving the state, and he couldn't go back to his birth family, so he had to be moved. And when we met him, I always tell my wife, I always tell everybody, it was like the most direct experience with God that I think I've ever felt, because the minute I laid eyes on Omar, I knew that he was supposed to be with me. I just knew he was my son. Wow. And so he was 15 months old, and
and he just graduated high
He just
school.
graduated from high school, and now we're taking him to college in July, which is going to be.
He's a ball player, right?
Yeah, he's going to play basketball at Wake Technical College in Raleigh, North Carolina.
Very cool. Very cool.
That's awesome.
And I'm moving to North Carolina for basketball season.
A little bit privileged to have an international film star.
And I graciously told my wife that she could move with me.
It's a good husband.
Yeah, because she comes first,
So is there some kind of difference between raising a child that you adopted and raising a child that you had biologically?
Yeah, I mean, yes, there is. I mean, when you have a biological child, there are certain things that you just sort of instinctively know about them because they're part of your flesh and blood or something. They inherit things from you, they inherit traits from you, their looks, their personalities. Oh, that's just like your mom, whatever.
Yeah.
But when you adopt a child, he comes with his own set of things that he's inherited that you have no idea. So, for his whole life, you just go, okay, where the hell's that coming from? But in terms of the sort of feeling that you have for them, I don't think there's a difference. I mean, we love Omar and been in love with him since he was a baby, but he's been sort of a mystery here and there because he doesn't have any of our traits inherited, and he's got his own set.
Yeah.
There's a weird question that really only applies to you and me here, is that when you live your life in the arts, there's a certain amount of involvement that just comes with the profession. I know you would never be egotistical in any way. I understand. But as an international film star, I know you're an international film star because I read it on your Twitter feed.
That's right. I try to tell people as much as possible.
Is that a particular difficulty, do you think, in being a father?
Well, yes and no. I mean, yeah, you do have a tendency sometimes to get kind of wrapped up in your own
head, yeah.
In your own head and your own activities. But on the other hand, you're home a lot.
That's true. That is absolutely true.
I mean, I remember my daughter had, career day at school when she was in kindergarten, and the other kids were like going, my dad's a fireman, and my dad, he works at the hospital. And Chloe goes, I don't know what he does. He's home all the time, watches television. I'm not sure. So, yeah, but you do have and my wife reminds me of that, has reminded me of that many times over the years in a very colorful way.
Yeah.
Having my head somewhere that it shouldn't be.
Yeah. It's an occupational hazard, I think.
Well, we're going to take our last round of questions from subscribers over at dailywire.com. These are the privileged few who are our monthly and annual subscribers who get to write in and ask questions of the panel. Elisha, what do we got?
Oh, we have a very important question here. Luke says, Ben, speaking of fathers, is your father's daughter-in-law a doctor?
Ooh, that's a riddle.
That is the rumor. The rumor is that she is, in fact, a doctor. I would never talk about such things. I mean, just like somebody who would never talk about being an international film star. I would never talk about my wife being a physician in family medicine and being in school forever and never, ever getting out of residency, ever.
On this, the biggest and fastest growing podcast.
The largest conservative podcast in the nation. Indeed. I would never say anything like that.
You would never talk about that.
No.
My favorite part of hosting the conversations with Ben is to see how many of those questions come in.
Well, we're definitely going to have to at some point have my wife on the Sunday conversation.
Oh my gosh, yes.
All the women in the office are very excited about this, just to see her just destroy me on air.
Yes.
It'll be the first Shapiro destroys Shapiro.
I can't wait. I cannot wait. And then in a few years, we'll have your oldest child on, and she will also do the same.
Oh, she's vicious. I mean, she's a killer. No question.
She's like you.
Yeah.
So moving on, a more serious question. Jacob asked a really good one. This is specifically for Ben. How involved should a dad be in their child's social and academic life? How thin is the line between being a helicopter parent or a deadbeat dad?
So, the truth is that Drew is sometimes better, positioned to answer some of these because his kids are older. For me, my view is that when it comes to social life, you got to make sure your kids are not hanging out with bad people, which means that you have to have a really good handle on who your kids are hanging out with. A lot of that comes through school choice and the community you choose to cultivate and the people you're hanging out with. So keeping your kids away from bad influences, I think, requires a certain amount of helicopter parenting. When it comes to academics, the hardest thing is allowing your kid to fail. I think that it really is a factor of effort. So what we've been trying to teach my daughter is that it's not a matter of what you accomplish, it's a matter of the effort that you're putting in. Because if you praise the accomplishment, then they get used to the accomplishment. And then when they fail, then they get really upset and they destroy themselves. Whereas if you praise the effort, well, the effort is always just a factor of how hard they're trying, and that's the only thing they can control anyway, because if you're trying as hard as you can't control anything beyond that. So what that really means is that in terms of academics, I'm very involved with my daughter in terms of reading books to her and teaching her how to read right now and all of that. But once she gets to a certain point, I want to help her enough that she has the tools so that she can do the work, but then I want to leave her to her own devices to actually succeed or fail.
It raises
along
a
her
good
own
question
lives.
for Nick and Drew, which is, because you have adult children now, what obligation does the father have to turn loose of the child and to let them become their own person?
It's the whole obligation. It's exactly what you're trying to do, is let that child become himself and herself and be free. But it's not helicopter parenting to pay attention to the kid's social life and to pay attention to the kid's academic life. It's helicopter parenting never to let the child fail, as you say, or risk.
Take a
or
risk,
take
exactly.
risk. That's helicopter parenting. And that, I think, is smothering.
I know,
but it's not the same thing as paying
I
attention.
noticed this with both of my parents, because I think it's easier for the father to, the father's not probably going to be baking cupcakes and going to, every PTA meeting or something. But both of my parents were always aware. They were aware of things I did not know they were aware of. They were always but they weren't inserting themselves all the time in all this little, I think that's the real key, because I would see, I'm not an international film and television star, but I'd be going on these little auditions or doing a little thing as a teenager or something. I'd see these poor kids with these stage mothers and these, stage fathers sometimes, hovering constantly in everything, and it just destroys.
Well, that's
kids.
the biggest thing, is not living out your own ambitions through your kids. That one is really tough, and I'm even having that as with the 4-year-old and the 2-year-old. It's like, well, I would love for you to do this. Well, maybe my kid doesn't want to do that, or maybe my kid isn't qualified to do that. Maybe they're qualified to do something else.
Yeah, it's huge.
Yeah.
Although I remember talking to your daughter and her telling me how you liked the idea of her becoming an actor, whereas I would have laid my body down.
Well, it's, my wife and I are just, my wife's a dancer and an actress, and Chloe, I remember she came home from college one time and said, I'm thinking about maybe going to law school, and Leslie and I were like, what? It's so boring.
No daughter of mine is going to law school.
Be a writer or
That's how we know
something.
you're not Jewish.
But also about the academics, it's sort of, we had totally different experiences. With Chloe, I don't think we ever spoke to her about her homework her whole life. She did, I got this, she was just on top of it all the time. And so, she was great. She was a great student. And with Omar, we were just like, buddy, you got a C. Way to go, man. Way to pull it through, We were just like, it's like, you just take them where they are, and as long as they're making the effort that they need to be making, and, then...
That's on account of boys and girls being exactly the same, which has also been the theme of the evening.
Yeah.
Also, if you have a choice, unlike as Nick said, do not let your kids go into acting.
No, it's easy. Go into it, I'm telling you. If I can do it, anybody can do it.
Don't be like Nick is generally good advice.
That's right, because you can't.
Speaking of those kids, Susan asks, hey guys, this is to everyone, what do you think about women who have been divorced but have kids in terms of what's best for the kids? Should they try to remarry?
I have an opinion about this, actually.
But Jeremy, you have an opinion about everything.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, I forgot.
What is the sound of one hand clapping? I got an opinion about this.
I think that there's a real age of the child question here, which is that if you have a child who is very, very young, newborn, 1, 2, 3, I think it's the obligation of the mother. Let's put divorce aside and think maybe the father passed away, because it takes out some of the complications of maybe there's a bad father out there somewhere. I think there's a certain obligation on the part of the wife to at least try to remarry in the period when the child is still young enough that having a father is going to be part of their foundational sort of understanding of the world. However, if the child is, let's say, 13, one of the hard ages, 11, 12, 13, I actually think that there's the opposite obligation. It's incumbent on the parent not to remarry during that period of time, when what you're going to thrust into the child in the hardest years of their life is confusion and competition for the affection of the parent that remains. And then once the child is grown, now it's incumbent on the parent to pursue their own fulfillment in whichever direction that takes them. And even if it offends the child, because the 20-year-old child or the 21 or 22-year-old child may still struggle with the fact that mom is now dating another man. But at that point, part of what you have to model for the child is the pursuit of marriage, the pursuit of fulfillment and finer things for yourself, and that the world isn't, that now that they're an adult, they can't have all of you in the same way that they've formerly had all of you. What do you guys think?
Yeah, listen, as the sole papist again in the room, I'm very anti-divorce, and I benefited in a way because the divorce of my parents happened when I was so young. My mother didn't remarry; she didn't really date, in my recollection, at all. Really, my father did remarry; that worked out fine. But I had functionally my parents, saw them every day, lived with my mother, saw my father every day. And that's the reason it worked. I mean, I really, when I think back, if my mother had dated or remarried, I really think there's a great deal of wisdom in 2 millennia of a church saying, don't you dare divorce, don't you remarry. There's a big debate now going on in the Catholic Church. Can civilly remarried people receive the Eucharist and all of that? And the traditional people are saying, no, there are all of these external effects that can really screw up a kid. And those are the victims of it. They're 5 years old, so they can't really say they're the victims of it. But there's a real cost to that.
Jeremy, I think you're basically right. But I think that just to make it a little bit more general, I think that the real question is, are you getting remarried for the benefit of the child, or are you getting remarried for the benefit of you? And if you're getting remarried for the benefit of the child, even if it's a troubled 10-year-old who needs a father in the home to actually crack the whip, then it seems more acceptable to me. But if you're just doing it because you're lonely and because you're having a problem, then your kids at that point, your first priority is making sure that your kids grow up healthy, not your own happiness.
And all of our opinions on anything like this are kind of generalities on one level or another, because the actual circumstances of course
right,
messy and unique.
I will say that the Catholics, I mean, this is as close as I come to being Catholic, is thinking if you have small kids and your spouse is not cheating on you or addicted or abusive, keep that marriage together, man. I mean, it is worth any kind of sacrifice to keep that world together for your kids, I think.
Doesn't it go to that discussion you were having earlier, though, about the the husband and the wife having to make the major relationship themselves in order to protect and provide a safe space for the kids? And it's like, if the mother is not remarrying because she's afraid of what it would do for the child and it makes her miserable, is that really helping the child?
Sure, I think that's fair.
It's a question.
You're right, and Ben, to point it back to the individual circumstance on some level, and still preferring creating those structures for the child, right? Your obligation in that environment is to the child, but it's also, Drew, you're talking about sticking it out, and part of what's hard in that lesson, especially because we get such instant gratification now, we're the richest people who've ever existed, we have the most access to any pleasure, any superficial satisfaction that you could ever have.
Especially if you use a VPN, you can get right into that.
But people often frame their divorces in these sort of, along false dichotomies, like, you just want me to be unhappily married to this person to help this kid? And of course, if the answer is be unhappily married to protect the kid, the answer is yes. But I just almost always reject that those are your only two options.
That's right. That's absolutely
You can also salvage your marriage. You can build a better marriage. It goes back to that conversation from very early on. You're in an arranged marriage now anyway. The marriage that you have does not have to be the marriage you have had.
That's right. That's right. The prices, I mean, reaching this age, you see some of the friends you grew up with and grew old with, the things they suffer from worst are the little things they didn't fix. I mean, it's not the big mistakes. We all make big mistakes along the line, but it's the thing you do every single day. And even your friends say to you, stop doing that, that's hurting you. And you know it, but you don't do anything about it. Fix it.
But this is also why I think the only important decision you make your entire life is who you marry. I really think it's the only important decision, because the kids that come after that, I mean, half of all kids were conceived by accident, right? We live in a world where everybody's being planned, but the reality is that for virtually all of human history, half the time the babies were premature.
Kids are something that happened to you.
Right, exactly. So it really is about that. And this is what my dad always said when we were growing up, which is that there's really only one key decision that you're going to make that you cannot take back, and that is the person that you marry. And if you do that right, the rest of your life is probably going to go fine. And if you do that wrong, you are going to F up your life beyond all recognition. And I think that's essentially
F
correct.
means freak. Elisha, one more question.
This is a podcast, so he could say it, but I don't think he would. Our final question for tonight comes from Brendan, and it goes back to a biblical question. Why does the Bible choose to portray God as a father when God is above and outside the biological reality and limits of male and female?
I think we have to let Jeremy answer.
Yeah, lay pastor, go for it. And then I'll do the rabbinic version. So.
I do think this is part of what I was speaking to a minute ago. The question is, why does the Bible represent God as a father when God is obviously not gendered in the way that, in the way of the creation?
I mean, he's a middle-aged guy with a mustache, but sure.
A little big, long white beard.
I heard he has this kind of hair.
And I think that the answer is because of in God condescending, as I said, to us in a way that we can't comprehend God. And so part of the beauty of God is that he makes himself, if not comprehensible, at least encounterable. And part of how he's done that is to take the traits that of father, the trait of husband, to call himself things like love, to call himself, if you take like a Galatians 5, it's in the sequel too. If you take the sort of fruits of the Spirit, that means the virtues of God, right? If the Spirit is God, then those are the fruits of God, as patience and kindness and long-suffering, humility. That God claims those as himself so that we can begin to understand him. And then as we understand him in whatever small way we're able, we then begin to understand those traits. So it flows both ways. We only can understand God because he's given us some context for understanding him. And in the context that he gives us, he's also expressing something to us about our experience of the world beyond him. So God isn't our father, but a father is an entry to understanding God, and then God is an entry to understanding what it is to be a father. And so why doesn't he use, as in some religions, the feminine, earth mother, the idea of, because I think it's that God, while God does nurture us and give us life, and even the Bible uses a few feminine references to God, and they're
feminine names of God.
They're feminine names of God. But it primarily uses masculine ones because, unlike what the pagans want us to think, which is that God is primarily about giving us life and nurturing us, God is actually, that's the beginning of what God did for us. What he goes on to do is shape us and constrain us, and then after constraining us, give us freedom. And those are very paternal impulses. I often think of big government as being the perverse feminine values. That if the father gives you freedom, the father raises you to stand on your own, the father pushes you out of the nest, the father turns loose of you. Those are masculine impulses. The perverse version of the feminine, if the good version of the feminine is give life, give nurturing, the perverse version is use the gift of nurturing to gain power and control. And so Reagan is the father figure of a president because he says, out of the nest and on your own, I'm going to raise you to be an adult, and then I'm going to trust you. I know you're going to make mistakes, but I'm going to trust you to make your own way. Obama is the mother of the country who says, no, honey, it's okay. I'm going to take care of your rent, and I'm going to take care of your health care, but you really shouldn't eat that.
I am paying your rent.
I am paying your rent.
That's so well said. That's C.S. Lewis talks about that. He says, and when he's explaining Christianity, he says, Jesus is the only begotten Son of God, whatever that means. And he died for your sins, whatever that means. I know I have a finite intellect, and I don't have the divine logic of the universe banging around in my head, so I can't explain what God the Father is, right? He is that he is, but I can know that God as the Father gives me something. It leads me there. It puts it in perspective.
That's our old friend Uncle Aristotle, who's talked about God as the prime mover. The way he moves is by drawing us to himself, and that's a very fatherly thing to do.
And Maimonides talks about the use of homonyms in the Bible and the use of the idea that we're using constant human descriptors for God. And the way that atheists read the Bible is they say, well, that's because human beings are writing the Bible, so they're taking their own vision of their father, and then they are turning that into God. This is the sort of Freudian version of totem and taboo, that you took your dad and you made him into God, and that's why God is the father. And the way that Jews and Christians read this stuff is that we can't describe God in any language other than the language that we know. And so if God's trying to talk to us, then he's got to use language that we understand to a certain extent. In Judaism, there's the basic kind of division between male and female, typically, on a spiritual level, is the division between justice and mercy. So mercy is considered a feminine quality, and justice is considered a masculine quality, which, by the way, is typically how it works in the home. I mean, at least that is the way that it has worked in my home, just naturally. When it's time to bring the hammer, everyone calls dad. right? That's just the way it goes. Like when it's time for the hammer to come, there's not a teenage boy on planet Earth who's afraid of his mother. Not one, right? That's why when the fathers aren't in the home, the boys are a disaster
Have
area.
you met
Except my
Italian
son.
boys? Yeah, Italian boys, they'll get a little...
Omar's afraid of his mother. Okay. Dad is too.
But the idea here is that one of the decisions one of the questions about God is God primarily a God of mercy or is God primarily a God of justice? And I'm not sure, I'll be interested to hear kind of the Christian perspective on this. But obviously the Old Testament perspective is that God is primarily a God of justice tempered by mercy. That the world is built along certain laws, and those laws operate in a certain way, and God can allow you to, he can be merciful toward you, because if he were not merciful toward you, you wouldn't exist, right? This is sort of the story of Adam and Eve. God says, if you do this, you will on that day you will surely die. But then he doesn't kill Adam and Eve.
It's a long day.
Right? He doesn't kill Adam and Eve. He says, okay, you're going to die eventually, which is God saying, okay, if I were to just punish sinners the way that sinners deserve to be punished, then everybody would be gone now, right? But God says, okay, well, these rules still apply, but I will be merciful toward you, and you should be merciful toward others because I'm merciful towards you. But in the end, God created a just system, a system that is built on certain inevitable laws that if you follow, you will largely do better in life, and if you do not follow, then there will be certain things that happen to you as well. And so God is typically portrayed in the masculine because if you are going to say the primary quality of God, the primary quality of God is justice, which is interesting because when you go back to Greek philosophy, the main virtue people are looking for, generally Platonic virtue, is justice, right? So it's interesting to see how that sort of merges.
I would say the Christian answer is yes, that God is a God of perfect justice and perfect mercy. And in that way, God sort of, there's that old question, can God make a rock so big he can't carry it? And the answer is yes. And then he made a mechanism by which he could carry it. So God has this duality that creates this sort of unbridgeable tension of being perfectly just and perfectly merciful, which doesn't matter if you're only dealing with righteous beings. You can be perfectly merciful and perfectly just, and those are just abstracts. When he deals with us, now there's a division. And so in the Christian sense, he then created the mechanism to bridge those two in Christ, in whom he is able to pour out his justice as a mechanism of pouring out his mercy, pour out his justice on Christ so that he could pour out his mercy on us. Elisha, thank you so much for your...
Well, I mean, who needs Wednesday night Bible study when we have these Tuesday night roundtables, right?
And you get the cigars.
I'm taking notes over here.
Thank you so much for filling in the questions for us tonight, and thanks to everybody who wrote in. We love hearing from our subscribers. We joke a lot about how we gouge you guys for, all we give you is one lousy tumbler. But part of the reason that we do these things, that we do the conversation, and try to take questions and interact is because we are so deeply appreciative. You guys make it possible for us at the Daily Wire to do what we do on an ongoing basis, and we're grateful for it. So thank you, and we'll catch you guys as far as questions go on the conversation coming up with Ben, and then we're going to do another one of these, I think, around the 4th of July sometime with a good special guest.
I'm probably working then. So.
In the meantime, before we can adjourn for the night, I think we've got a few more minutes, another segment in us, and I want to turn to Michael. Michael was...
Catch you later.
Michael, as everyone knows who was invited, Nick, was recently married in New York 2 weeks ago, and I am certain that you can't have a conversation about what it means to be a husband without all the old hands feeling like they have some wisdom to impart to the young buck. So I would caution you, of course, to take all of this with a grain of salt.
Yeah.
But let's go around and what is the one piece of wisdom that you would most, don't go to bed angry, or I always say the key to marriage is 2 bathrooms and a king-size bed. Everybody has their own version, but what wisdom have you to impart, Mr. Shapiro? Not to sweet little Elisa.
It's
too late.
3 letters.
It's too late.
Yeah, right, exactly.
R-U-N.
But for Michael.
So, some people tell you to be yourself. Don't. Just stop being you
Especially
as
in your
fast
case.
as humanly possible. Just don't do it. But in reality, I really think that the key piece of advice is when your spouse criticizes you, listen, because your spouse is probably correct. And that's the hardest thing to do, because for me, it's very hard to do because, look at me, I'm unbelievable. But when my wife...
Yes, that was the word I was going for.
But it is a difficult thing to do, because in the middle of, arguing or discussing or whatever it is, in the middle of the night when you're deciding who has to get up and deal with the kids, it's very easy to think, okay, well, I did this last night. Why isn't she doing this tonight? And maybe it's because, she had a long day, and maybe you're being the one who's a jerk. I think that just like if you want to have a successful life, and this isn't directed at you, if you want to have a, because it's not going to happen for you, but if you want to have a,
in the abstract,
there's no need to worry about it.
In the abstract, if people want to have a successful life, they can't blame everything that's happening around them. You have to work on yourself. The same thing is true in marriage. You want to have a successful marriage, you can't change how your spouse reacts to you. You can't control your spouse's feelings. You're not responsible for your spouse's happiness. You're responsible for being a better person, and then hopefully your spouse will be happier because you're a better person. But I really don't think that you can. All you can do is be a better person toward your spouse, and then beyond that, it's just not in your control, I think.
You know, it was funny. I was joking with Michael. I guess today's Tuesday, so it was Monday. I was joking with him that all you guys gave him such complicated advice, and my advice was don't sleep with anybody else, which is actually good advice. But you know, as someone I have had, and I've written about this, so it's not a secret. I've had this kind of supernatural marriage of a genuine romance that has gone on now 40 years. And it's a strange thing. When people ask me about it, my first joke is always, "You got to marry my wife." Yeah. But the key thing I always think is like, be nice. You know, be polite. I see people talk to their wives in ways they would never talk to a waitress, in ways they would never talk to a stranger, in ways they'd never talk to somebody at work. And it just seems like that very basic thing. When you have something to say it politely. You know, I mean, she is still another human being. She's still a woman. You know, she still deserves that kind of grace and politeness and gentility that you bring, even you, God help you, bring to everybody around you. You know, you don't push people aside in the street. You don't snap at people in restaurants. You don't do all those things. And yet people take that home, and that's the first way they react to an unwashed dish in the sink or whatever it is. And I just think it's just that little thing that happens with every word you speak, you know, that I think feeds into an actual good marriage over time.
Because you see people do that all the time. They're mean to their family. They're mean to the people who are closest to them, and they're nice to everybody else.
I know, and to me that is, you're getting it exactly wrong. Shouldn't be mean to anybody, but if you're going to be mean to anybody, shouldn't be your spouse. You know?
No, should save that for people on Twitter.
Nick, I think at this point, you're the reason I'm on Twitter. It's just to read your Twitter, the greatest thing on the internet.
I have two pieces of advice. My wife, when we had been married about 10 years, we have friends, a couple that have been married longer than us. And she, you know, in a moment of just despair goes, "What's the secret? How are you guys so happy?" And Carl and Nancy, our friends, said, "Lower your expectations." And Leslie went, and things have been better since then. So that's one thing. And the other thing is there's another slogan that I've had, it's been hard for me to learn, but I think I've finally learned it. And my friend Russell Friedman, who ran the Grief Recovery Institute, used to tell me this. Ask yourself, do you want to be right or do you want to be happy?
This is exactly right. This is exactly right. Yep.
So, you know, when you realize that you're fighting over something just to be right, then you probably are giving up your happiness. So
it's funny because, you know, all of us all the time, especially on Twitter, but, you know, in just political life, the method of debate is always to smash the other person, right? You gotta, like, that's the line, right? Is so-and-so crushes so-and-so. But when you're in a marriage, you don't want to crush them, you know, because you have to sleep next to them and wake up and have breakfast together. And so it's, you know, it's a very different experience than the professional life to your personal life.
I'll do two as well. The first one is, you know, there's the whole Ephesians thing about husbands are the head of the wife as Christ is the head of the church. And that's always very offensive to women because they think that men want what they want. So women don't like the idea that they have to submit to their husband because they assume that their husband wants to rule over them because they, by and large, want to rule over their husband. But in this is actually the dual sacrifice. There's no such term in our culture as the woman cave, right? There's the man cave. Men don't want to be in charge. They don't want to be responsible. They're not as good at being in charge. They're not as good at being responsible. Women are better at detail. They're better at multitasking. They're better at many of the things that a wife has to trust her husband to be for her. And the husband can't stay in his man cave and play video games, which is what he wants to do. He has to leave behind his childish ways of being selfish and independent, and now come and make sacrifice on behalf of someone else. So actually, both parties in the marriage are having to lay down the thing that they want and step into a role that's not natural for them in a kind of optimistic faith in the institution of marriage. And that's my ultimate advice. Well, I would add to that also remember that it says, as Christ loves the church, which actually means we often think of it in terms of, well, I'm the husband, I'm the man, I'm the leader. But the analogy is actually to teach you to be the bride of God, to be the one who is the other things, which should give us also some sense of perspective on what's being asked of the other person. But ultimately, that's it, is the recognition that the other person isn't you, that they are fundamentally different, that you and your wife will never actually agree on a single thing. And the way that good marriages get you in trouble is that because you don't have a lot of conflict, you think you agree. And because you have good conversation and say all the same things, you also think that you agree. And so you'll say, like, I love popcorn. And your wife will say, I love popcorn. And you will think that what that means is that your wife loves popcorn. But that is never what it means. You are completely different people. You are wired completely differently. Even the areas of your agreement are actually unique and distinct. And the reason Nick's lower your expectations advice is so great, I think, is because it's actually just, it's not lower your expectations, it's stop having these expectations that you were never promised, that the other person will be you, that they will see things the way that you see things, that they will want the things that you want. You have to actually understand that they are other. And my last piece of what I think is top-notch marriage advice is when worse comes to worse, go to bed angry. And I mean this, it's a little bit playful, but what I mean is sometimes you will encounter a problem in your marriage that one single night will not be able to solve. And the idea that never go to bed angry has always struck me as a superficial piece of advice, like we're going to be able to work out the hardest conflicts in life in a single moment. But sometimes all you can do is stop and go to bed. And going to bed is trusting the institution of marriage. It's accepting that if I go to bed now, I will wake up tomorrow still married. And that the only way that your marriages don't end, they are ended. And the only way your marriage will be ended is if you or your spouse end it. And sometimes there's a surrender of faith of saying, I am not going to end this. I don't know how to fix it, but the institution itself will remain if I can just stop.
I have one more. So this is one that I've used in marriage. It's a great trick. Okay, so women do this thing, okay? And this thing is that, well, at least my wife does this, and she knows that I'm going to talk about this. So what it is that women will ask you a question, and they will talk to you about a situation in their life, and you will assume that they want this situation solved. They do not want this situation solved, right? They want this situation listened to. They want you to listen, okay? Men don't like this stuff, right? Men, when you hear a problem, you want to fix it because you're a dude. But when your wife just wants the feeling of you having listened to her. So I have an actual rule in our house, which is that as soon as my wife starts with this, I will ask her, is this a solving conversation or is this a listening conversation? And it works great. It works great because my wife is a good enough person that she understands that this will make our relationship better. If she actually gives me an honest answer, she'll say, okay, I just want you to hear what I'm saying right now as opposed to I want you to fix it, because there's nothing that pisses off a woman more than her giving you a problem and you trying to fix it when all she wants you to do is listen to her problem.
This is an amazing, and that is so true. I remember the first time I encountered this, sweet little Elisa had some problem, and explained it to me. And I said, okay, well, you should do this, and then do this tomorrow, and then it'll be good. Goes, you just want to fix things. What else am I supposed to do? But this is eternal advice.
Yep.
But if you forget everything else, don't sleep with anybody else.
And don't sleep with other women.
And on that excellent advice, which I think applies to both fatherhood, husbandhood, general decent blokeness, we will adjourn for the evening on this, the Daily Wire Backstage's sophomore effort. I think we gave it the old college try.
We gave it the old college try.
We did all right. Thank you guys for tuning in for so very, very long. And we'll look forward to seeing you again when we reconvene here in a couple of weeks for episode 3.